Chapter 281, Chapter 7, Soldiers, Smiths and Dragons. My customary session of patting myself on the back lasted me for only an hour or so before I grew bored once again and stepped out to be a general bother while I waited for my guests to rest themselves. First, I made my way to the training grounds and barracks, a large walled-off part of the city positioned to the side of the main canyon entrance. My troops were advancing nicely in both numbers and experience, the constant skirmishes with the feral farmer allowing them to get blooded with relatively low risks to their lives. They still got beat up to near death, but that just meant the lesson stuck more often than not, and I was more than fine with that outcome. With their numbers growing constantly, I finally decided to introduce some variation to the usual combat kit, leading to the staunch line of halberds now being joined by shield bearers and even a small unit of heavily armored repeater crossbowmen. Those fuckers could be downright terrifying sometimes, especially when a disturbingly high number of them tended to cackle like madmen as they mowed down entire groups of goblinoids. These were indeed my people. Onto a much less disturbing note, a good number of my veterans had had the opportunity to attune themselves to combat levels of magic use, and that naturally led to a respectable number of them discovering they were not quite as talentless at magic as they initially believed. Needless to say, the poor bastards signed themselves up for proper magic training, and I promptly shoved that responsibility onto Edrasa and Nightshade, who then proceeded to vent their irritation at the new recruits. At least most of them could cast a proper firebolt now, and a couple could even toss a rudimentary fireball without knocking themselves out for a day. Their focus on fire magic throughout their initial training meant that not many were able to discover affinities or talents for other schools of magic before they were recruited into the tower. But I felt that was a massive waste and organized extensive testing for all of them. I wasn't sure this would result in the house developing at least a minor mage culture, but Amur could hope so. I let things continue as they were without trying to force things. Once they realized I was observing their training, the mock battle I stepped in to observe turned far more efficient and brutal, with both sides trying to show off without earning a thorough beating by the officers for doing something offensively stupid like breaking formation. There were many broken bones by the time they were done. The weapons used in training were just much heavier blunted versions of their live weapons, and both the captains and I encouraged them to not hold back during practice. They needed to learn how to take a hit, and the healers needed the practice. The victorious side got to skip out on patrol duty for the night, and satisfied with the display and subsequent report given to me by Varen, I left the training grounds and headed for the other side of the city. As I crossed a hidden threshold, I was hit with a wall of heat and noise, all of it still magically reduced by a wide-ranged ward and still somehow managing to be too loud. It was almost as if the damned place was cursed. This was the third damn tweak I made this week, and somehow it always managed to exceed my forever lowering expectations. Accepting that a foundry was never not going to be loud, I admitted defeat, and went in to inspect my very early factory. Or, well, I wouldn't go quite that far in calling it that. It would be far more appropriate to call it a metalworkers' guild house and manufactory, a place where all the artisans under my rule gathered to make early industrial quantities of anything from tools to weapons to automaton parts. The whole thing started as a stray idea I had one day when I found out that the Vale was pretty rich in metals. Even if they wouldn't be getting extracted for years due to safety reasons, setting up a logistics chain for their use later on was still the smart thing to do, and it wasn't like I was incapable of just importing the raw materials for now. Anyway, logistics aside, while there were many skilled Mer who escaped the confines of the Grey Quarter, they all still needed training, and it was here that my beloved good luck struck again as a master smith decided to enter my service after I had apparently saved 2 of his grandchildren from starvation. Supposedly, he was unable to get to them while they were still in Windhelm and was all too willing to accept the task of training up the willing workforce in exchange for a peaceful place for them to grow up. And so it was that I ended up with a nice 24 smiths of varying skills under my employ and sponsoring the start of a localized guild. I spent some time looking over their work, mentally going through the quotas I had them follow, as even with magic, the city wasn't going to build itself. I wasn't a smith personally, but I had by this point transmuted and used enough tools and weapons to have a good understanding of what was quality and what was not. Currently, they were all busy producing vast amounts of farming tools, seeing as the area in front of the walls was soon going to end up being safe for work. And to my great satisfaction, the entire line of tools was of more than acceptable quality. I accepted Varmir's, the master smith's, report and left them all with a pep in my step and a groan of satisfaction once the noise finally died down behind its barrier. Hours went by as I did my rounds across the whole city, ensuring that it was all running smoothly and just being a general bother by making people either very uncomfortable or too distracted to keep working by simply existing. It wasn't until Carsus himself, now the de facto mayor of the whole place, came and politely told me to fuck off and go bother the farmer or something, that I left the people to their own devices. Not before ensuring that my guests were informed of where I was going, though. And so it was that I found myself outside the boundaries of the city, standing in front of a pair of very dead dragons and patiently waiting for their curiosity to lead them my way. I did not have to wait long. Magnificent, are they not? I ask without turning around. Well, I hear Marco gulp. They are certainly something. Smaller than Vulthuriel, Minthara comments immediately, attempting to sound unbothered by the sight or the thing it represented and failing miserably. I snort lightly at her response. Both were massive fucking cowards. They ran away at first and then tried ambushing us. They did not survive the attempt. Dragons being cowards? The Imperial agent mumbles in confusion from her spot beside Minthara. Why, yes, indeed. I finally turn and look to Junior. Dragons are indeed capable of having instincts of self-preservation, instincts that are naturally activated by being attacked by a group of circle companions and a duo of arch-magi. The information immediately makes her go deep in thought, said thoughts being so obvious I could practically hear them. I wonder how this can be applied in hunting them down. I am not sure if I respect the immediate instinct to kill it with fire, or if I am disappointed that she latched onto the fact that dragons can feel fear and didn't have the wit to realize that just because they can, doesn't mean they will. And why is it that you have called us here? This time it is Marco who speaks up. That is, if you did want us to come. I did, I confirm his suspicions, and the reason should be rather obvious. These dragons are rather recently slain. All eyes moved to Minthara, who was looking at the still pristine corpses like they were the most disgusting thing in the world. We can delay it if you don't feel like it, I tell her patiently, but delaying it won't make it go away, I am afraid. Of course not. She grouses and approaches the first corpse. She stares at it for a long while before steeling herself and muttering, "Best get it out of the way then." And then she lays her hand upon the cold and dead snout. And nothing happens. I can feel the soul still residing within. She speaks up with a deep frown. But I can't seem to pull it out, almost as if it doesn't belong to me. The soul I consumed in Blackreach was almost willing to be taken, but these are actively resisting. I place a hand below my chin and begin thinking about the possibilities, while the rest of them do much the same. I do believe I may know what is going on. A deep voice rumbles behind the group, and the reactions are magnificent. Marco screams like a little girl. Junior just stands there frozen as two massive golden embers stare down at her. And Minthara is already charging ahead. Well, she would be if my hand wasn't currently holding her by the cloak. It takes her a moment to realize she wasn't getting anywhere, and of course she chooses to escalate by taking a deep breath. I promptly bonk her on the head with a folded scroll, completely and utterly destroying all tension by the sheer collective incredulity at my action. Getting a bit uncomfortable from all four stares, my eye twitches. What? And just like that, the situation calms down. Not before Minthara asks the important question, "Raven, why exactly is there a dragon currently staring down at us and not trying to murder us?" Such vitriol toward your own kin. I tisk and shake my head, immediately earning myself another glare, and having gotten enough amusement out of this, I actually give the answer, "This is Krynar Vokun, an ally of mine I met during your travels in Cyrodiil. He has agreed to join our cause and has even been tutoring me in the voice when we both have the time." Do not be so humble, Thuri. Kryn's eyes practically twinkle in amusement as he is about to throw me under the bus, Minthara's ears already perking up at the unfamiliar word. I am not merely an ally, but a subject. Feel no shame in saying so, for I do not. A beat of stunned silence later, the Dragonborn actually explodes. All right, what the fuck? Marco just whimpers dramatically, as if the world itself had just been cursed with something terrible. Accepting my fate with an internal grumble, I snap my fingers, summoning up a bunch of chairs and some dry wood, setting up a small campsite and allowing us all to warm ourselves in the cold night. Once everyone was seated and comfortable, I began my tale. For context, it would be best if I started at the beginning. I let my words hang for a moment before continuing. Not long after the two of you left Skyrim, my network caught rumors of a group of vampire hunters. One long-ass explanation on both the Volkihar threat and my incursion into the Soul Cairn later. And here I thought our own adventures were exciting. Marco huffs as I finish telling them about cracking the cairn open. He shakes his head wistfully. Turns out we are still thinking too small. How? Minthara asks the dragon dumbly. I've seen the memories of one of you, and even thinking about any of you swearing yourselves to another feels unnatural. Suffering makes even the truly immortal humble. My kin and I have suffered for a very long time. Crine admits easily, his form coiling around the entire campsite. Once I was challenged, the choice was as easy as they got. I either got a good fight that would break the monotony, or the mortal challenger proved to be far greater than I thought, earning himself the right to his attempt of becoming my lord. So you just didn't care, she immediately concludes. The dragon lets out a vaguely affirmative hum. At first it was so. But once I was cleansed and got a good look at my lord's true self, I admit a spark of excitement awoke in my once resigned soul. The world of mortals had grown far beyond what it once was, and I am pleased to be able to observe it. He was obviously leaving a lot of stuff out, but neither of us was under the obligation of telling them anything more than necessary. I see. She lies badly, giving me a quick searching look before turning back to the dragon. You said that you knew what may be the problem with the dragon souls? I did indeed, Dovahkiin. Crine rumbles. It is because you did not participate in the slaying, and I hold the greater claim to them by virtue of being the Dova to bring the two fools down. Wait a second. Marco almost jumps from his seat. Other dragons can consume dragon souls as well. It is possible. Crine hums neutrally, a bit of disgust in his voice. But just because you can eat elf meat, do you do so, Fahlil? Marco winces and offers an intelligent reply. Ah. In any case, the dragon preempts any further questions by looking at Minthara with a burning focus that was not there before. It is possible for me to forfeit my claim upon these two pitiful insects to you. Do you wish me to do so? It does not take her long to catch on. And what will that cost me? The slaying of Alduin. He responds immediately and without hesitation. I have grown to enjoy the mortal realm, and I will not see it ended. So do your duty given to you by Father Dovahkiin, and I shall be more than happy to aid you. She finds herself briefly stunned, but still cannot help but ask, I was already going to do that, though. Good. Crine simply nods his massive head, explaining himself no further. Fine. Minthara accepts after another moment. Tell me what I must do. Instead of explaining anything, Crine simply speaks a string of words in Dova Zul, something along the lines of, I do hereby offer this prey as gift in tribute to my kin, and some other grandiose declarations that seem to resound with the very world itself. The moment he stopped speaking, I could feel it. The souls left his grasp and immediately latched onto the nearest Dova, practically leaping at her in a surge of blinding gold. For a moment she stood there with her eyes glowing with power, an expression of amazement on her face, and for a moment it almost seemed as if she would be able to take the two souls without consequence. That is, until she toppled over, falling face first into the deep snow. Marco and I share a deadpan look while Junior goes to pick her up. This is going to become a thing, isn't it? Both of us speak in perfect sync. Crine pointedly remains silent. Chapter 282, Chapter 8, Souls, Realizations and Plans. Hate you. The annoyed, grouchy voice of my fellow semi-divine being reaches my ears as she forces herself to get up. Hate you so much. You should not just fall asleep in the middle of nowhere then. I shrug my shoulders, ignoring the fact one of her hands was twitching toward her blade, while the other was trying to remove the snow from her hair. It had been a few minutes since she consumed the souls of the twins, and once Crine had declared it safe, I proceeded to wake her up in the most expedient way possible, namely by throwing a veritable mountain of snow on top of her and causing her to launch herself from the ground to escape the sudden chill. Marco was still laughing his ass off, which quickly earned him a pile of snow from Minthara, who knew I'd just dodge if she tried that on me, and simply settled on venting her frustrations on the poor Altmer. He did not stop laughing. No doubt nursing a massive headache, Minthara let herself fall into one of the chairs I summoned and palmed her sweating forehead. As she settled somewhat, she let out an annoyed grunt. "You were right. Those two were absolute cowards." Crine makes a vaguely amused noise. I do believe they called it being wise and choosing one's battles, but seeing where their supposed wisdom led them, I feel that taking them at their word would be unwise. He seems awfully smug at saying that, especially so considering he said pretty much the same thing to me once we were done butchering the two fucks. The Dragonborn barely even listens to him and almost topples over her seat as her head starts to spin due to the almost visible soul energy surging all around her. That is great and all, but I need you to tell me what to pick right now, or my head is going to burst. It really isn't though, I point out. Raven, she pleads, threatens. Time. I tell her with no further hesitation, time fuckery is too powerful to ignore. She nods weakly and closes her eyes. Indeed, Crine hums approvingly. Our father's children are all granted a connection to time, being spirits of it in essence. A wise choice for any fledgling Dovar. He focuses on the demigod currently stuck in a state akin to meditation, feel each moment pass as if it were eternity itself, yet the smallest blink of an eye, each moment a grain of sand upon a sea of infinity. As he spoke, I could see Minthara visibly relaxing, the energy becoming far more focused before finally snapping into place. Her eyes opened, filled with the same clarity of purpose she was imbued with all the way back at Blackreach. Except now her presence held physical weight, enough to make even me pay attention to an extent. So that is how it works, I hear her mutter. Crine's head lowers closer to her. You have understood then, he asks, almost sounding excited. Yes, she nods, her voice a tad colder than usual. It all makes perfect sense. I deadpan, and now you are going to tell me that you somehow got the full shout in mere seconds. Your seer powers must be working perfectly, because that is exactly what I was going to tell you. Minthara responds with zero hesitation, even sounding a bit smug about it, as she imitated my usual signature condescension to near perfection. Fucking bullshit. I curse with a laugh and shake my head, though in truth I was neither surprised nor annoyed. I haven't even mastered the second word yet, and I've been focusing on that shout for actual years. Maybe you should leave it for those more qualified. She jests. Not all are as talented as we dragons. Yup, the memories were already getting to her. Do not so easily discount his efforts, my kin. Crine chides. He has advanced far beyond most mortal tongues are capable, and at such an incredibly young age for his own people as well. Suddenly realizing her own shift in behavior, she looks away with shame. I didn't mean it like that. Almost skittishly, she gives me an apologetic look. I just snort at this. Oh please, if I were so easy to offend, half the damn province would be at war. That earns me some very odd looks. Right. Marco nods to himself, wisely deciding not to question my words of enlightenment. Well then. I clap my hands and get up from my seat. That has been enough drama for the night. You should all get some rest and meet me in the morning. We have plans to discuss. My words were met with universal agreement, and we soon departed back to the city, an air of excitement following us all the way. Just as I was about to go to turn in for the day, I heard someone knocking at my door. One quick look revealed a Davos with a serious expression on his face. With a simple mental command, the illusory doors disappeared, and the stone wall that stood in their place opened up, letting him inside. Wordlessly, he approached and handed me a letter, a report on the war I realized after a quick scan. Scouts and spies reported that the Stormcloaks were moving toward Dawnstar in numbers, An entire army 12,000 strong was marching through the many mountain passages known only to the locals who had lived there for generations. And now we had only a week to prepare before they managed to link up with the 10,000-strong garrison in Dawnstar, and the entire hold was secure in their hands. It would seem Ulfric has learned of his son's failure. I mused disinterestedly, and the twat somehow escaped Helgen while I was out of it. For some reason, I find myself unsurprised. You expected him to? Davos asks, though even he realized how needless the question was. It is of little consequence. I wave it off. Should he return to their ranks, his obvious naivete would lead him to tell his fellow rebels exactly what happened back there, which will lead to at least some of the Stormcloak higher-ups losing morale and potentially even the will to fight. So even if we lose, we still win. Davos chuckles and shakes his head. Exactly how I like it. Just so. I allow myself a smirk. That all you had for me, or... I also got a report on our dear friend from Riften. He informs me without preamble. She says that she is almost prepared to take over once we manage to win a big victory. The rumor mill has been singing her praises while absolutely shitting on the lawgiver, so the people are pretty much prepared for a coup should we want it. That is for the city. But what about the villages? I question. Riften and the Rift were two very different things after all. There will be some issues after the takeover, but Maven assured me she is able to deal with it. He informs me, sounding pretty confident about it as well. Even the Argonians are in on it. It didn't even take much, she just promised them better conditions, and they practically swore their undying fealty. Considering how they are treated everywhere outside of Black Marsh, I am not surprised. I accept the information easily. After so long living in abject poverty, getting the chance to have a basic lifestyle starts looking like heaven to most people. Yeah. Davos nods and trails off briefly. You know, it's quite funny. He huffs at some internal realization. For all our vaunted superiority over the Argonians back in Morrowind, we ended up pretty much the same as them once, outside of our own homeland, didn't we? Speak for yourself. I pretend to huff, earning a deadpan. Shaking my head, I give him a knowing look. Are you only now realizing that we are all at the end of the day just mere mortals with most of our differences being superficial, and that the true difference between us is status and not bloodline? I wouldn't go quite that far. He shrugs. But yeah, it is funny how little such things actually matter when you are just trying to survive. I was paraphrasing, obviously. I shake my head. There are differences, but as I've said, they are all superficial. He ponders my words for a moment and finally asks, so are you telling me that if you had a choice between getting Argonian or Dunmer to serve you, you would choose either? Fuck no, I snort, earning a confused look. I would always choose the Dunmer, but not because of any belief of superiority. Quite simply, we share a culture and vaguely share a religion, leading to a much more harmonious relationship all around. If I wanted to have Argonians under me, I'd befriend a popular leader among them and then place them all under said leader's command and let them serve me indirectly. In fact, I resume after a brief pause, I have already done this in the case of the Falmer, so it really shouldn't be a surprise to you. Fair enough, boss. Davos nods. Sorry for wasting your time with this. I just felt a bit lost after seeing the situation for what it was. The US versus them mentality is for the peons. I give him a pointed look. It is high time you realize you are no longer counted among their numbers. I already told you this many times. Well, that isn't ominous at all, he grouses. Still, thanks for not just waving it off. Yeah, whatever. I shoo him away. He chuckles and goes to leave. Just as the wall is about to close, I call out, "Oh, and by the way, Davos, congratulations." His eyes widen in confusion, but the wall is already closed. I am quite happy for the both of them, but I can't help but wonder how the first Dunmer-Falmer hybrid is going to end up looking. Should be interesting at least. You have a problem. A problem? Silence is my answer. That is what I thought. As the last of the 250-strong company of my most elite warriors passes through the way shrine leading to Winterhold, I give Orin a folded scroll. These are your tasks while I am gone. Your primary objective is getting to Eastern Dawnstar without heavy losses, at which point I will be joining you. If you should find a good opportunity to do damage to the enemy, confirm first and then go for it. Otherwise, I demand caution. The eldest of the three brothers bows his head and accepts the scroll. It will be as you will it, my lord. He continues the bow for a few seconds longer before straightening up, saluting me, and marching off after his men. Still can't believe you have an army, Marco comments with exaggerated fear in his voice. Ducal guard force. I correct him with a raised finger, my tone shifting to the proper pomp of a grand nobleman. Can't have the good emperor accusing me of treason, now can we? But of course, my good sir. Marco joins in on the bit, sounding just as pompous as I. Someone of your renowned honor and respect for authority found to be breaking imperial law. Unthinkable, I say. I can practically feel Minthara's headache as she palms her face and mutters, "Why am I surrounded by damned children?" Well, I drawl, "At Arnon are not all mortals, but children in the eyes of you dragons." My eyes almost glow with cruelty as the final words leave me. And they have the intended effect, as she shrinks on herself, looking anywhere but at me. I told you I didn't mean it like that. As much as I find teasing our terrifying dragon overlady to be fun, Marco voices from behind me, wisely taking cover in advance, I think it is high time we decided on a course of action. Yes. I turn serious as if flipping a switch, taking the wind out of their sails just as they were about to get into an argument. We will be moving to Helgen to check on the repairs before passing through Riverwood to meet up with someone and finally heading to Whiterun. After which point I will be leaving you and heading for Dawnstar myself. What is going to happen at Whiterun? Minthara asks, already suspicious. A dragon attack is likely. I for once decide to abandon my usual vagaries. An excellent spot for you to bring a bit of hope back to the people and start earning a reputation. Must everything be so calculated to you? She complains half-heartedly. Yes, I answer with zero pause. If you can make use of something, you should do so. You aren't wrong, she admits begrudgingly. Anything else I should know? I tug at my goatee briefly before speaking. You might get an invitation from a bunch of monks sitting atop the big mountain. Dumb fucks are going to be announcing your presence to anyone and everyone. Once the people see you nomming on the scaly fucker's soul, so you should be ready for a bunch of dragons to start challenging you. Of course, just what I needed, she grumbles. Think of it this way. I interrupt her spiral of self-doubt. If the dragons are busy chasing you and feeding you their power, they aren't attacking innocent settlements. Her slumping shoulders straighten immediately, but she quickly realizes what I've done and gives me a glare before accepting her fate. Just move us to Helgen already, please. And so I do. Chapter 283, Chapter 9, Grabbing a Few Blades. See to it that the people are provided anything you deem necessary for their recovery. In times such as these, they must know they are cared for by their leaders. I tell the Imperial Quartermaster as he finishes with his report. A couple of words on the High King's efforts would also not be remiss. Aye, sir, no need to tell me how to do me job. The old quartermaster grumbles and offers a lazy salute. Tullius had left the town half a day ago, as he also got news about the Dawnstar front, leaving Helgen in command of the combined forces of Falkreath and Whiterun, and immediately commanding his troops into a forced march and leaving a message of apology for further borrowing my automatons for the rapid maneuver. Not like I minded, those were only spiders, and if they did manage to reverse engineer them, then all power to them. Not that they would. I must have misheard you because I swear I just heard you volunteer for dragon scouting duty. The smarmy fuck suddenly realizes just how tiny he is compared to me as I loom over him with a threatening glare. The salute he offers in the next instant is crisp enough to lead a parade. Yes, sir. Court mage, sir. He shouts in perfect military cadence. Excellent. I grin and shoo the man away. Go on, get on with it. The fool almost topples over himself as he tries to get as far away from me as possible without making himself look like a complete idiot. Done terrorizing the authorities? Marco calls out from nearby. That will do for now. I relax my posture and give him a questioning look. You lot done? Just about. He waves his hand as if to say, so-so. There are some of them still in need of healing. but Minthara has been going through them faster than they could gather, so she should be done by now. Excellent. I clap my hands and start moving toward the designated shelter area, signaling Marco to follow after me. Can't waste too much time here. We need to be in Whiterun by evening, and we have another stop to make. We linked up with Minthara and Junior as the former finished healing the final scraped arm for the day, and after barely convincing the surprisingly ecstatic populace that forming a procession to see us off would be counterproductive, we left the crumbled town and headed north. Except just as I was about to teleport us to our next destination, we were met with a somewhat surprising sight, at least to myself, namely a heavily laden cart towed by a stocky draft horse, driven by a familiar stringy Nord man from Whiterun's wider hold. Well now, I did not expect to see you here. I say in lieu of greeting, "How is your daughter doing, my good man?" Lokir of Rorikstead practically leaps from his seat after making sure his cart was stopped and immediately offers me a deep bow. "An honor to meet you again, Flame Tanuj." He smiles. "She is in perfect health. Both my wife and I are eternally grateful." He was dressed in far better clothing than the last time I saw him, and that cart was downright bursting with different goods. It would seem the man had gotten fortunate and managed to profit from the current conflict. Not that I had any right to judge him for that. "You earned that help by helping me in the first place." I clap his shoulder, shaking him slightly, and then pulling him up to face me. "There are no debts between us." He smiles genuinely. "You honor me." "Enough about that. What are you doing all the way here?" "I am afraid that the town isn't all that good for trade at the moment." I point at the ruins. "I came here to see if I could help and make a bit of gold while doing it." He shrugs. "So long as they don't try haggling me down to nothing, I'd still make a profit with all that I've brought, and I figured the Empire wouldn't mind." "They won't," I assure him, and just as I am about to continue with the conversation, I am distracted by Minthara clearing her throat. Looking up at the skies and wincing slightly, I offer the man an apologetic look. "Sadly, we are in a bit of a rush. It is good to see that you are moving up in the world after that whole debacle." "It feels much better from here." He jests lightly, and as we are about to leave, I hear him call out, "Talos be with you, sir." "Ballsy." I offer a respectful nod at his back and turn to the rest of the group, who were mostly bemused by the idea of me knowing some random merchant. "Ready?" A trio of nods is their response, and waiting no further, I clap my hands, cracking the space around us. My hand flicks forward before we even appear at our destination, crushing the moonstone dagger, going for my neck into tiny shards, and grabbing the offending arm with insulting ease, twisting it around and pinning the owner to the ground, and then just to add insult to injury, I place my foot on their back, not allowing them to move even a bit. You will find that I am completely unarmed. A balding old Nord on the distant side of the room carefully spreads his arms in surrender, and that my arms are facing well and truly away from you. "Esbern, what in oblivion are you doing?" My assailant snarls from below my feet. "Unlike you, I am ensuring that we are not turned into fine piles of ash, Delphine." The elder blade chides, his eyes fully focused on me. One does not easily survive the likes of our guest, especially after trying to gut them. "Yes, Delphine," I drawl mockingly. "Where are your manners?" "You." She hisses, "Can you not use the door like a normal person?" "Normal person?" I tilt my head. "Pardon me, madam, but who exactly do you think you are talking to here?" She turns silent and simply lets herself slump onto the floor, accepting her fate. "Well, that is no fun." I step off her, allowing her to get up. "You can stop doing that now, old man. I am not going to murder your ass." He immediately relaxes and takes a seat. "What a relief." He notes happily, "And might I say what a great honor it is to meet you in person, Lord Dagoth. Your agents were very helpful in evading my pursuers. Whoever wishes to fuck the Thalmor over shall have my aid," I proclaim grandly. "A worthy outlook, by any measure." The elder nods, fully serious, and then glances at the group behind me. "I do hope you will forgive me for asking after the identities of your companions." "Don't bother." Delphine speaks up after having gotten a very diluted health potion to deal with the pain of getting slammed into the ground. "The children are his apprentices, while the other one is one of our replacements." Her voice turns bitter at that last bit. Marco snickers and palms his face, while Junior looks far too smug for a professional agent. Children? I hear Minthara mutter in genuine surprise and gives me a look of confusion. I thought the blades were supposed to be competent. They must be having an off day. The whole dragon's appearing seems to have shaken even them. I offer lamely, completely ignoring the confused stare John glare of the duo. I have been informed of your love of mind games. Esbern speaks up, his eye twitching slightly. But would you be so kind as to inform us of what exactly is going on right now without turning it into an elaborate verbal game of cat and mouse? I trust you have heard of the recent events in Helgen, I ask instead of answering. Yes. The elder's expression turns grave. A massive black dragon shattered the entire fortified town, only pushed back through the efforts of the King's Court mage and his apprentices. I have several theories on who the dragon may be. It is Alduin. I cut him off without mercy. The expression on his face says more than his words ever could, as he looked like his entire world crumbled before his eyes. Then we are doomed. Only a dragonborn can face the end, and there are none. Hold Esbern. Delphine stops him from spiraling and turns to me with suspicion in her eyes. I have only a vague understanding of that prophecy, but seeing you standing there without even the slightest bit of worry tells me you know more than you told us. Use your sharpened mind, Blade, I say mockingly while tapping the side of my head. I am certain that you will catch up quickly enough. She frowned deeply, her thoughts no doubt going wild as she stood there and stared at me. It was only after her eyes shifted to my companions that she started to realize what was going on. Dragonbane, she mutters and looks to me again. It wasn't you who slew the dragon, was it? It has less to do with the slaying and more to do with participation, but yes. I explain vaguely and wickedly add, I do believe someone is owed an apology. Delphine looks like she had just swallowed a lemon, but still looks to Minthara, my Apollo. Are we done here? The Dragonborn interrupts, completely done with this charade. Hold on a second, please. Esbern stands up, suddenly a lot more energetic. Are you two saying what I think you are saying? Indeed. I grin and enter my proclamation pose. It is my honor to intro Ugh. I feel something akin to a missile slam into my shin as Minthara groans and shoves me away, placing herself in front of the excited Blade and simply stating, Minthara Septim Dragonborn. Septim? Even Delphine finds herself momentarily stunned. That is, until she notices Esbern, who was already kneeling on the floor. What is your command, my lady? What are you doing? Delphine hisses at him. They could be... I will remind you, Delphine, that I am the elder here, Esbern states gravely. The Blades have failed once. We will not do so again. He looks up to the unimpressed Dragonborn. We are yours to command, Lady Septim. Even with all her training, Junior fails to hold back a quiet snort of derision. You talk as if you are certain I want the service of two bickering codgers. Minthara scoffs, making the both of them look down in shame. She gives me a look, and we share a silent conversation, namely me indicating to her that waste is bad, and her pouting. Before the two try and justify themselves, she preempts them with a tired sigh. Against my better judgment, I will not deny you out of hand. You will get the chance to prove yourselves. She stares at them for a moment longer before barking out, Pack up, we are moving out immediately. That dragon is not going to wait for us to prepare. The duo were still reeling from the revelations, but still got to packing up almost mechanically. A good 3 minutes later, our group was fully prepared, and I once again denied the laws of the world, appearing where I was not. As our sight cleared, we were met with the image of court wizard Farengar, visibly relaxing after seeing us appear in front of Dragon's Reach court mage. He bows respectfully. I trust that your unannounced incursion is not without its due reason. There is a slight edge of irritation in his voice as he asks that. Appearing before a warded fortress via teleportation was usually a sign of attack, so people tended to get rather skittish about that, making the genial old mage's reaction perfectly understandable. An emergency, I am afraid. I confirm swiftly, is the Jarl in? He is. Farengar nods and starts leading us to the keep. The hall is heated with debate on how to deal with the rumors of that dragon attack. His eyes twinkle with curiosity as he looks at me. I hear you had an opportunity to examine the creature up close. I have, I hum, and so shall you before long. He stops for a moment before muttering, "Oh," and suddenly walking a lot faster than before. The guards pushed open the gates of Dragon's Reach, leading us straight into the scene of Balgruuf debating with his people about the appropriate reaction to the sudden threat, until he suddenly stopped and turned straight to me. "Balgruuf," I greet him merrily. "I am afraid I bring ill news." The doors are once again pushed open, a huffing guard rushing in, completely ignoring us as he passes us by. "My lord, terrible news." Balgruuf gave me a look that was a mix of accusation and being happy I was there to help with whatever he was about to hear. Before looking to the young guardsman and asking, "What news do you bring, soldier?" "A dragon," the lad shouts. "A dragon has attacked the Western Watchtower." Well, talk about shitty timing. Chapter 284, Chapter X, Western Watchtower. As soon as the panicked guardsman finished speaking, Balgruuf started rapid-firing one question after the other, getting as much information from the now sobbing lad as he could before standing up and issuing his orders. "Irileth, gather every blade willing, get the clans involved as well." He barks to his housecarl and turns to his steward. "Avenici announce a bounty of 300 septims for every soul brave enough to face the beast, and 1,000 for any who do true damage. Farengar." "May I accompany you, my Jarl?" Farengar interrupts a bit too eagerly. "I would very much like to see this dragon." Balgruuf considers for a moment before sending a short look my way and shaking his head in annoyance. "Very well, but this is not a game. Your first priority is helping us bring it down, not studying it." Farengar offered him a deep bow. "I will keep my curiosity in check, I swear it," and left for his chambers, no doubt to fetch whatever scrolls and potions he could. Hrongar was already fully armed and armored, somehow managing to grab Isgeir in mere seconds. Balgruuf shared a pained look with his brother before solemnly nodding and accepting his own axe. Someone tossed him an accaton and suit of chainmail, followed by a breastplate. All of it he started putting on as he passed me by and said, "Walk with me, Raven." Signaling for my own group to join Irileth, I stepped in beside the worried Jarl. Instead of berating me for being late or something equally wasteful, he simply asked, "What are we walking into?" "Single dragon. Should be one of the weaker ones." I answer simply, "Still, expect losses." "That much is a given," he admits coldly. A silent moment passes as we descend the stairs of Dragon's Reach, the now fully armored Balgruuf seemingly deep in thought until he spoke quietly. "I had hoped against hope that what you prophesied would not happen." I let out a mirthless chuckle at that. Trust me, if I had the choice between looking like an idiot and facing the apocalypse, I'd look the fool every time. Being on a timer and knowing it was never a pleasant thing. The world is rarely so charitable. The rice smell, at least the chance to prepare beforehand, or I dread to imagine the damage. "Hope for the best, prepare for the worst." I quote lightly and clap him on the shoulder. "But that is enough of that. We have a worm to slay." Like the heroes of old. Balgruuf shakes his head, seemingly amused by the idea. In less than 20 minutes, a large force had already left the city. It was too little time to gather a true army, but we still managed to scrounge up close to 500 fighters, most of them from the garrison, while the rest were made up from glory-hungry clansmen, their thanes, and simple citizens who could afford weapons and armor. It went without saying that the companions joined in their entirety, or at least those who were present within the city, up to and including Kodlak Whitemane himself. The Old Nord practically radiated excitement as he led his circle to the forefront of the formation, even as his aged body looked far worse for wear. As for my old friend, well, only his respect for the elder warrior stopped Durek from rushing ahead of everyone in hopes of finding the dragon as quick as possible so he can get to the stabbing. It took us another half hour to reach the watchtower, the scene that awaited being just as bad as I've come to expect from the usual destructive potential of the Dove. The Western Watchtower may have been called that, but it was much more than a simple stone tower. The structure was surrounded by a well-made palisade, which surrounded a few other wooden structures that most likely served as the barracks for the local garrison. Or at least it did before today. The whole thing was either turned to ash or blasted into rubble, the main structure barely standing with multiple holes in its surface, its peak still burning as the flames consumed what I recognized was a large aerial scorpion. There were even a couple of my own ballistae in the rubble, completely out of commission, of course, as they would not have stopped shooting unless they were wrecked. A couple of disheveled men, garbed in Whiterun guard armor, ran out of the tower as we approached, both immediately saluting Balgruuf as the one who wasn't covered in burns spoke. "My Jarl, you should not be here. The beast is still around." Balgruuf regarded the man for a moment before tilting his head slightly. "Has your fear eroded whatever respect you had for me, Bromar, that you would suggest I not rush to the defense of my people?" The man cringed as if slapped but stood firm. We did not even see it coming. One moment we were having a game of horseshoes, and the next half the tower was aflame. His shoulders slump. Hiroki did not even get to aim the weapon before he was burned to ash. The Jarl's gaze softened at seeing one of his men so defeated, but before he could speak again, a distant roar drew everyone's attention. "God save us," Bromar muttered in pure terror. "He comes again." And there in the distance we could see him, a grey splotch marring the beautiful skies of Skyrim, rapidly becoming larger as it descended toward us with what I sensed was pure malice. "Spread out and aim for the weak spots," Balgruuf bellowed, awakening the stunned crowd. "Aim for its wings and bring it down so that it may taste our blades. Sovngarde awaits." A thunderous roar echoed his battle cry, and battle was joined. The dragon swooped in without preamble, immediately attempting to bathe a large swathe of our formation in his fire breath as dozens of arrows pinged off his scales ineffectually. His speed was immense, not anything on Alduin's level, but the weakest among the glory seekers could barely even perceive him as he clawed them to pieces with every opportunity. A thunderous boom stopped him from slaughtering a group of stunned Nords who were just realizing what exactly they signed up for. Magnus's staff glowing with power in my hand as I started ripping wounds into his wings with blasts of disintegrating lightning. It took only a couple to make him pay attention to me, but he soon grew wise to the threat I represented and responded with a shout of "Span den Fiek," which seemed to weaken my spells and outright block out most the rest of them, allowing him to dodge out of my bombardment. Still, my presence forbade him from going wild as he willed, so instead of continuing a war of attrition he would lose, he switched tactics. The words of Whirlwind Sprint resounded across the battlefield as began maneuvering with even greater speed, grabbing those unfortunate enough to catch his eye and launching them into the air, or at their comrades. Those he did not manage to grab, he simply blasted apart with unrelenting force, not even deigning to pay attention to them, as they and the ground below them were turned to chunks. Anyone not immediately killed by such tactics was saved by either Farengar or myself as we levitated them into relative safety, trading immediate death for only getting their bones crushed with the inertia. Not even Ayla hitting him in the mouth as he went to shout her apart seemed to dissuade him from facing a small army. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying the fight as he proclaimed, "I had forgotten what fine sport you mortals provide." This seemed to galvanize the Nords as they started loosing arrows and bolts at far greater speeds, to discouragingly little effect as the blood-hungry beast seemed to dodge each and every shot that may have been deadly. As Mirmulnir went in for another strafe, he failed to notice a blur of green as Durek jumped out from behind a crumbled building and threw his spear with all of his monstrous strength, nailing him straight in the joint that connected his right wing with the rest of his body, turning each flap into agony and lowering his maneuverability greatly. I could have probably ended the battle then and there. All I had to do was teleport above his flailing arse and turn his back into mush with my sword. But this was not my show, not today anyway. Support of both folk and nobles had to be earned, and I was more than willing to sacrifice a couple of suicidal fools if it meant progressing my overall plans. Incredibly callous of me, I know, but needs must and all that. Still, I wasn't about to just let people die otherwise if I could help it. So after blasting the spear still lodged in the fucker's wing with lightning and making him flail into the ground beside the tower, I teleported to the nearest dying man and got to healing. General POV. Even as her fellow Nords died around her, Minthara still couldn't help but feel a hint of disappointment. The dragon they were facing now was nowhere near as terrifying as the beast that leveled Helgen. Its movements were sloppier and its voice a pathetic imitation. Still, she would not relax just because things were easier than facing a literal god. As Mirmulnir rounded to the side, avoiding another bolt of lightning from Irileth and clawing a circle companion to pieces, his eyes met hers and seemed to almost glow in recognition. A gleeful grin spreading on his face as he breathed in Fus Rodar. Guided by her instincts, she responded immediately with her own blast of unrelenting force, the two waves of power meeting just below the tower itself and clashing in a cacophonous crack that sent the entire structure flying westwards, spraying the whole field with stone bricks and killing dozens of men and women before they even realized what was going on. The battlefield turned deathly silent as the two regarded each other. The dragon was the first to speak, an inborn arrogance lacing his voice. Finally, a creature worthy of my teeth. He grinned. You face Mirmulnir. Rejoice, Dovahkiin, for my lord shall feast on your soul in Sovngarde. Minthara stared at the arrogant butcher in front of her and found that she felt unimpressed. She spat on the ground and readied her hammer, the enchantments carved into the metal, brimming in anticipation of smashing her foe. Your master is going to die a miserable death for all the suffering he has caused. But you will suffice for now. Before the dragon could respond, Minthara shouted, Jaw, followed by a tear-eyed Kerlo Earl. To the outside world, it seemed almost as if she turned into a blinking column of afterimages as she practically appeared in front of the dragon. Only one person managed to even see her swing her hammer a full 10 times in less than a second before the effects of her shout ended and the laws of the world reasserted themselves. Mirmulnir's head snapped to the side, a good half of his jaw turning to paste as the rest of his teeth were dislodged by the sudden impact and force, the hammer guilty of the deed actually exploding from the rebound as the enchantment overloaded due to the sudden strain, sending her sprawling back. The wounded beast growled and howled with fury, foregoing any further taunts or shouts and bounding toward her, intending to stop her from ever getting up and repeating her earlier humiliation. But in his rage, the dragon had seemingly forgotten that he was still, in fact, standing on a battlefield. The imposing form of Kodlak Whitemane, joined by the twins Farkas and Vilkas, rushed him from the side, hacking into his unguarded underbelly with all of their supernatural Daedric strength. He did not even manage to look at them before the rushing form of Balgruf slammed his wounded face with his shield. Hrongar already moving in with an overhead slash as Mirmulnir tried to crush the brave Jarl in his mouth. But unfortunately, the dragon remained stunned for only a brief moment before his wits returned to him. His tail flashed out, forcing the companions back, but to the casual observer, miraculously not turning them to paste. His front claws swung for the heads of the noble brothers, shattering Balgruf's shield and sending him reeling back, while his other claw rent the mid-swing arm off the shoulder of the Jarl's brother. Everyone watching thought the man was already dead, but to their sheer dumbfounded astonishment, Hrongar did not even grunt in pain, and instead proceeded to headbutt the dragon, who was at the time trying to devour his brother. Not quite making him flinch, but at least stopping his movement and knocking himself out in the process. The time they bought was more than enough, as Minthara charged back into the fray once again, her sword aglow in her hands as golden spectres seemed to overlap with her swing, severing the claws that attempted to cleave her in two. The dragon recoiled in pain, fire already forming in his mouth as he was forced to use magic to summon it instead of the voice with his skill so lacking and his tongue mangled so thoroughly. But magical flames, especially those cast by someone unused to doing so, were easily thwarted. Minthara did not even look up as a sturdy ward surrounded her, the fires passing around her without doing any harm and placing her in perfect position for the killing blow. Once more, the spirits of the blades overlapped with her own movements as she swung her sword upwards in a wide arc, feeling almost no resistance as her sword decapitated the dragon in one swift movement. Her heart was beating faster than she ever remembered it doing, the sheer elation of defeating a dragon in both voice and might turning her blood to fire. And then the headless stump decided now was the perfect moment to cover her in blood and viscera. Even as she felt herself consuming the dragon's soul, she could not force her eyes to stop twitching, nor free her face from its deadpan expression. Such was her frustration with the world that she managed to remain standing this time, unconsciously raising her blade as her mind seemed to catch up to the fact. A silence descended upon what was once the Western Watchtower's grounds, before everyone, Nord or not, broke out into a massive cheer, the fact of what they considered to be their deed slowly settling in their minds. The bards really were going to go wild with this one. Span Dean Fiek to shield defend reflect. Ti declo ul to time sand eternity. Chapter 285. Chapter Eden. Dovahkiin. Even as she kept muttering curses at the now very dead dragon, the proud part of Minthara basked in the adoration the crowd of battered warriors offered, her back straightening just a tiny bit with every word of praise she heard. That same part of her made a stray thought enter her mind unbidden. This is where I belong. The thought was fleeting, but it was something she knew would remain in the back of her head for a long time. She was not preening, and she would smack anyone who said otherwise. But it would seem that not all appreciated her display, as she sensed a very annoyed glare being directed at her back. Raven's POV. As the Nords cheered their throats out, completely ignoring the just under 200 dead around them, I was too busy holding myself back from smacking a little shit. Sure, it was badass that she essentially stopped time and proceeded to maul the poor motherfucker in less than it took me to blink, and then proceeded to fucking decapitate his scaly ass. Somehow, but I could not stop my left eye from twitching violently. This little shit just broke my hammer. How in Mephalah's spidery sacks do you manage to break a weapon enchanted by ME of all people? A weapon enchanted specifically to take superhuman levels of punishment. That thing was supposed to crush through ebony without chipping. The pained whimpering of a downed Nord made me deflate as I got back to work, fixing up the idiots who thought fighting a dragon while clad in leather and armed with a short bow was somehow a good idea. Keep telling yourself that. Scorch mocks, it might make the fact you let them die less frustrating. Ignoring the future participant in my soup experiments, I continued treating the wounded. Stabilizing most of them did not take me much time. The more rowdy fighters didn't even stop cheering before I was done, in fact. And as I finished forcing a potion down the throat of the still knocked-out Hrongar, I heard one of the housecarls speak. I cannot believe it. He pointed at Minthara. You're dragonborn. I am aware. The blood-soaked demigod deadpanned, all of her jubilation immediately drowned as she realized she would now have to deal with this. Another chimed in. By the gods, that hasn't happened since Tiber Septim, yes. Minthara accepts a bit more forcefully this time. Look, can we leave this for later? I am really not in the mood right now. She gestures to her apparel and the blood still dripping on the ground and pooling below her. Leave the good woman be, lads. Balgruuf interrupts with a wry yet tired look on his face. She has earned that much at the very least. The soldiers accept his words without much complaint and leave to talk among themselves, the whole group of them looking as animated as children as they spoke of what they had just witnessed. My Minthara, I call out with a shit-eating grin and immediately see her tense up. I did not expect that killing a dragon would actually make you wet. Balgruuf choked and started coughing painfully, stuck between glaring at me and holding back his laughter. The soaked demigoddess sent a glare of such intensity my way. If she could power it, I'd have been disintegrated on the spot. I will fucking murder you, Raven. I tilt my head, my grin still plastered on my face. So you don't need my help? I ask innocently. She briefly debates with herself, her desire to not be filthy warring with her fear of giving me another win. Yet the conclusion was as inevitable as my reaction. Letting her shoulders slump in defeat, she forced out a please. My levels of smug reached a whole new level as I simply waved my hand, combining water magic with a bit of blood control I learned from the Volkihars, immediately forcing every single bit stuck to her very expensive clothes to detach and fall onto the ground. She was so relieved by this that she even forgot to be angry for a moment as she basked in the fact she was not covered in filth. What kind of amateur enchanted that armor anyway? I ask after a brief pause. Who forgets to add a self-cleaning function on such expensive gear? The drain is practically non-existent. Her immediate reaction is to turn defensive, but once my words actually reach her, she turns thoughtful, cupping her chin and frowning. That is actually a very good question. Is it new? I ask leadingly. She stills for a moment and very cautiously confirms, yees. I just let out a malicious giggle and say nothing. Fucking Titus, I hear her mutter. If you are snuck. Balgruf, who was still laughing, stops himself from bursting into another fit. If you are quite done. He forces himself to keep a straight face. I think we should help the rest deal with the damage. We can talk once we are back in Whiterun. His gaze turns serious as he inclines his head ever so slightly. You have my thanks, Dragonborn. She offers a solemn nod in return. And what am I, chopped liver? I snark with no heat. He turns to me with a chiding but not hostile look. You know what you did. And leaves. Once we were alone, Minthara looked at me with some curiosity. What did you do? As tempting as it was to fuck with her by telling the truth, I knew that would be going way too far. So I settled on smiling mysteriously. That is for me to know and for you to wonder about. Uh-huh. She deadpans, not even pretending to be surprised by my answer. Let's just get to work. The sun had completely set by the time we finally started marching back to the city. The battlefield was thoroughly cleaned up with the bodies and personal effects of the fallen, all being brought back with us so that they may be given to their families and buried with honor. Just as we were approaching the gate, I felt a shimmer of power coming from the distant east, a mere moment before the very air cracked with the call, Dovar Keen. The entire column stopped, and I could hear Balgruf muttering, the greybeards. He immediately looked to Minthara. I may be no expert in the voice, but it doesn't take much to guess what that meant. It translates to Dragonborn, yes? She explains without any enthusiasm, even seeming to grumble a bit at me being right once again. Noticing this, Balgruf tries to cheer her up. Being acknowledged by the greybeards is a great honor. Why, even as I climbed the 7,000 steps up the mountain, I did not even come close to being blessed with an invitation to High Hrothgar. Oh, I feel so very honored, Jarl Balgruf. She drawls with obvious sarcasm. It was so nice of them to announce to every single dragon in the province that I exist. How very sporting of them. A good chunk of the crowd looked away awkwardly at this, seemingly only now realizing that the Thuum was in fact dragon speak. She wasn't wrong though, even if it would force her to grow much faster. The Greybeard's declaration was essentially an invitation and challenge to all the ambitious dragons who wanted to prove themselves to Alduin, for them to throw their lives and, more importantly, souls at the burgeoning young Dover who challenged their power. So naturally, I decided to butt in. Offering her my most vindictive grin, I asked in a sing-song voice, "Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. Can I come with?" Seeing as I spent a good chunk of our early lessons in the voice shit talking the old fuckers on the mountain, she immediately realized my intention and offered a beaming grin in return. But of course, who am I to deny such a devout pilgrim? Is it just me, or... The still groggy Hrongar whispered to his brother, are they saying something other than they are actually saying? Or at least he tried to whisper as half the damned army could hear him. Balgruf, who had just finished offering a prayer to Kyne and Arkay for the souls of the old monks, shook his head forlornly. Do not worry yourself about it, brother. You will live longer that way. All right. The bear of a man simply shrugged and walked off to join a group of housecarls. That man. I hear Marco say to Junior, one can only aspire to reach the same heights. What, an idiot? The Imperial asks sarcastically. Marco shakes his head, his eyes shining with false envy. Free. The agent stares at him for a moment, shakes her head, and starts walking off. And here I thought you were charming. What an idiot I was. The poor Altmer looked more dead than the dragon whose head was being carted in front of him. The interaction did cause a wave of laughter amongst the tired troops, though, so that was a plus. Curious, I lightly scanned her emotions and found that she did not actually dislike him. Much the opposite, really, just with the addition of one tiny little itty-bitty detail. The woman was a massive sadist. It would seem that Marco was thoroughly fucked at this point, both literally and not. Shaking my head and wishing the boy luck, I caught up to the rest. joining in a conversation between the blades and their liege. It would seem that Delphine had just gotten her "blades were dragon slayers" idea and tried roping Minthara in. The way she utterly crushed it was more beautiful than the decapitation of Mirmulnir, and Delphine's disappointed look was something I would keep in my mental archives for as long as I could. Nursing a drink which was cursed to hold no effect, I tuned out most of the proceedings after we returned to Whiterun. Balgruuf had me say a few words and let me slink off into a corner while he held speech after speech for each of the more relevant fallen heroes. All the while, a wild feast was spreading throughout the entire city. The savvy ruler wasted no time in naming Minthara an honorary thane of his city and offering his niece as her personal housecarl, and so it was that Lydia found her destiny at Minthara's side, her fate as the designated pack mule sealed forevermore. The two did hit it off quite well, surprisingly enough, so I could at least be content in the fact that Lydia was not too likely to end up being launched off a mountain by way of unrelenting force. Chuckling at that mental image, memory, I allowed my thoughts to drift further east, as I genuinely wondered how Ulfric was going to react to this whole thing. Would the setbacks he suffered make him more reasonable, or would he attempt to double down while his people burned around him? I was genuinely disappointed that my conclusion led me toward believing the latter of those two propositions. I must have been stuck in that trail of thought for longer than I realized, because the next thing I felt was someone dragging me up with a force that did not belong to a mortal creature. My surprised expression quickly shifted into a complete deadpan as I realized that it was Minthara who pulled me up, a very drunk and uncharacteristically merry Minthara. "Ravine," she slurred, "what are you doing skulking in that dark corner?" Wizardly pondering, I voice dryly, "Kamoon, lighten up." She sways as she speaks, almost falling over. "We won, didn't we?" "Uh-huh." I nod and slowly place a hand on her shoulder to stop her from suddenly falling over, "and I see you have rediscovered the wonders of booze. So little time away from Mead, and you already forget his lessons." "I am the Dragonburn," she hiccups. "I can do whatever I want." And then she keels over and vomits all over the floor. I give the curious feast-goers a pointed look, and they suddenly find themselves with other interesting things to occupy their eyes as I make sure the woman of the hour doesn't end up covered in filth for the second time in the day. To no one's surprise, it took her barely any time to recover, as she was once again awake and aware in mere minutes after spilling her guts on Balgruuf's floors. Much to the man's amusement, but it would seem that the celebratory spirit had left her with the departed spirits as she simply sat down next to me and joined me in my people watching. Bleary-eyed and half asleep, she probably did not even realize it when she asked me, "Hey, Raven?" Registering my questioning hum, she continued, "I didn't make a fool of myself, did I?" Holding back an eye roll, I tap her on the back. "Relax, you did great." "Thanks," she mumbled and fell asleep while leaning her head on the table. I let her remain there for a couple of minutes before summoning Junior and telling her to take her to a room. Deciding to actually listen to her words for once, I left my dark corner and spent the rest of the feast sharing tales with the companions as the warrior order mourned their dead and celebrated their ascension. I also made sure to subtly question Kodlak about their little conflict with the Silver Hand and how that was escalating, the answer to which was a mix of success and failure, mostly due to overeager circle members rushing into danger without thought and ending up surrounded by enemies. The fact that they survived just as often as they died was not lost on me. Time seemed to fly as we began sharing tales, and soon the sun was about to rise once more, so I decided it was time for me to leave. I said my goodbyes to Balgruuf and his brother, left instructions for Minthara's party to meet me at the caves hiding Gaimund's halls, with a map of course, and departed toward Dawnstar. I should have the whole thing done before the poor greybeards were deprived of the blessing that was my presence. Chapter 286, Chapter 12, Dawnstar. General POV. In one of the many passes carved through Mount Another, a large, if somewhat disorganized military camp, dotted with blue banners with the symbol of the snarling bear, stood firmly against the cold night winds, threatening to batter its inhabitants down the many dangerous inclines which dotted its surface. A large fur-lined tent stood at its center, heavily armored guards standing tall and doing their best to ignore the shouting currently happening within. An aged Nord built like a bear and clad in a cloak bearing said animal's likeness slammed the rugged table below him. The young man who moments earlier brought them the news wincing at the sound, Talos, damn it all, he roared, first it is that damned elf and now it is dragons. Do the gods take enjoyment in our suffering? His liege lord palmed his face, hiding his own fury. Calm yourself, Galmar. Blaming the gods for our misfortune will give us nothing. We must focus on doing what we can, not lamenting ourselves. He gave a sidelong glance to the messenger, or the failures of our own. Skirnir Stormcloak lowered his eyes, partially ashamed by the chastisement and partially furious by his father's evident lack of care for his life. The Stormcloak general sucked in a breath before allowing himself to calm slightly. You are right, of course, he admitted as he shook his head, but that does not give us a solution for our current problem. It is simple, Ulfric Stormcloak spoke after a moment of thought. We must win, and we must win hard, pushing as far into their territory as we can once the advantage is ours. The time for half measures is over. We will win, Talos willing, or we will die. As he spoke, he moved a figurine carved in his likeness to a certain spot on the map of Dawnstar Hold. Galmar stared at him for a long while, admiration and concern equal in his eyes. Risky. He spoke finally. I like it. Ulfric allowed himself a huff of amusement before he once more turned serious. Send a message to Windhelm and tell them to have our hidden brothers emerge and overthrow the imperial lapdogs ruling over their holds. He pauses, almost hesitating for a moment before he firms his expression and speaks. And tell them to summon all available warriors to the front. Tell them to conscript them if they have to. We cannot afford to lose here, or our people will forever remain under the yoke of Cyrodiil. The elf will inevitably be there. Galmar adds cautiously, he will not make this easy. Ulfric frowned deeply as his son shivered in remembrance. What is it, boy? Ha hey. Skirnir gulped before calming himself. He is far stronger than you think. He stood up to the dragon and held it back on his own. He has already killed one in Blackreach, whelp. Galmar's word carried a question. You don't get it? Skirnir shook his head. He had an army in Blackreach. In Helgen, he stood up to it on his own. Their fight shattered the entire city and probably more, but that is all I could see before they shoved me underground. Cowardice aside, Ulfric stared down at his son. If what you say is true, then we will have to take him down as quickly as possible, lest he ravage our troops without us being able to do a thing. Galmar spat on the ground. Damn elves and their magic. We must plan around him then. Ulfric turned to the tent's entrance. Summon Shattershield and his apprentices. As a housecarl shuffled away, he looked back to Galmar. Even if they are not his match, their experience will be useful at least. He will be eager to avenge his own. Galmar nodded solemnly. Boy, Ulfric called after a brief silence. Fetch the reports, we will go over them again. Soon, the hustle and bustle of the Stormcloak encampment magnified as changes to plans were made and spots for even more tents were cleared. The troops drilled themselves into exhaustion and the bards extolled the virtues of their cause. None of them noticed a dark figure slinking away into the night. The mail they wore producing no sound as they simply disappeared as if they were never there. Raven's POV, days later. I knew the mountains stopped a good chunk of the frigid air, but damn did I not expect Dawnstar's Hold to still be this freezing during springtime. The cold winds were a factor, but the fact it was still snowing in some places told me there was something deeper amiss. This place fucking sucks. Scorch comments from below me. Then again, it is a bunch of idiot noirs. Makes sense they are not worthy of the sun. Somehow he manages to nod smugly to himself while still flying faster than some planes. Could just be that they were unlucky enough to be at the edge of a cold sea current. I shrug. Not that it matters. We have arrived. As we crested the massive cloud hiding our passage, a vast tract of land came into sight, giving me a literal bird's-eye view of half the hold, and after a cursory scan, I had a pretty good idea of what was going on the entire Dawnstar front. Speaking of the frozen hellhole, I also got a good look at the city itself, and I had to say it surprised me by how well built the whole thing was. A vast stone wall, not particularly tall but definitely wider than most, stood as both protection against invaders and a dike to hold back the downright massive moat. The city surrounded itself with fed directly from the sea. The entire side of the city facing the Sea of Ghosts was completely covered in a massive series of fishing docks, and one larger one for merchants and warships being stationed in the middle. Numerous ships, most of them burned by the Imperial Navy blockade, swayed lightly in the waves as their crews were forced to do naught but wait the siege out. Although to their credit, I could see the Imperial galleys had suffered a fair bit of battle damage as well. None of the ships were sunk, but the fighting must have been rough on both sides. Too bad for the rebels that the Imperial Navy and the East Empire Company had far better ships. The residents of Dawnstar were fisherfolk and rarely raiders in times of war. Their fleets just couldn't compete. The interior of the city looked surprisingly clean from my perspective. An almost tier-like system of streets and building height seemed to be the norm, with the Jarl's Keep at the center being the tallest, and the rest getting progressively smaller as they came close to the walls, at which point the entire city seemed to just stop, leaving a large gap between the people's residences and the wall itself, thus creating the perfect kill zone in case anyone invaded. And yet, even with the respectable work the architects and planners did, and the presence of my people to the distant east, my eyes were drawn to a singular point, a small hill to the city's east, still within the walls themselves, housing a tall stone tower which served as the entire coast's lighthouse. A lighthouse currently radiating an aura of such lethargy and subtle terror, I was half tempted to blow the whole thing up out of hand. Naturally, that would have done absolutely nothing, so I contented myself with viciously smacking the influence of the demon within from my mind and making it sting her ever so slightly. She'd get her turn once I was done freeing the populace from their own stupidity, and the time came to free them from their nightmares as well. I wouldn't even be a dick about it. She did give us access to easy propaganda after all. Leaving such plans aside, I finally entered a relatively safe radius for precise teleportation, and announced by the slight cracking of the air, I appeared in front of the Legion's command center, within the heart of the veritable fortress they had surrounded within raiding distance from the city itself. The elite guards protecting Tullius's tents didn't even bother twitching as I appeared in front of them. The apparent leader of the quartet simply pointing his thumb behind him. "The general is in, sir." As the rest of them offered salutes, I found myself unable to even be annoyed, so I offered a lazy salute of my own and stepped inside. The sight that greeted me was the usual hustle and bustle of the legionary command. A good number of the officers within looking very worn out from the forced march they made all the way from Helgen, while the rest seemed as well rested as one could be on a battlefield. Which was not very. Tullius was far more chipper himself, however, the old Imperial knowing damn well that his being tired and making a dumb decision had far greater consequences than some random logistician forgetting to give a single unit their next shipment of javelins. Ricker wasn't present, and neither were a good number of the other officers I knew of, but one quick scan showed her on the other side of the camp in a similar command post, likely to ensure operational security and a good reaction time. I also sensed some familiar auras in a closed portion of the camp, something to ask the general later, I supposed. Another section of the vast military camp housed a bunch of Breton knights doing their thing. The groups from the other cities had finally arrived, and I could already see the politicking going on between the different orders if the small walls they erected between each other's sections were anything to go by. Though I had to appreciate the sheer pomp of their upbringing when I noticed an actual jousting ground in the middle of it, where a duo of knights were currently battering each other with a mix of magic and inertia. Still, that was mostly irrelevant at the moment. I was here for a reason. As he noticed me enter, Tullius's eyes immediately bore into mine, the map below him swiftly left forgotten as he asked the question which no doubt weighed on his mind greatly, "What happened at Whiterun?" "Still haven't gotten a full report," I ask idly, and he shakes his head. Nodding in understanding, I take a seat one of the lesser officers offered me. I light up a cigar, take a moment to enjoy it, and give my answer. A dragon attacked one of the surrounding forts, many died, but it was brought down, and the will of the divine was made known to all. It takes him a brief moment to realize what I was getting at, but the moment he does, the man looks like a ton of rocks was just lifted from his shoulders. Good, he states, spreading relief to his subordinates. That is good. He settles again, almost as if to reassure himself. Quite, I offer neutrally, but I do believe we have more pressing matters to attend to. Tullius's entire demeanor shifts back to his usual stoic general persona as he nods. You are right, we have a war to win. He signals one of his questors to approach, having him place carved figurines at the large central table. As we expected, Tullius begins as the young man places a line of blue figures to the east, just across a small river. The rebels' operations picked up as soon as the ice retreated. Multiple villages and fortifications have already been destroyed in the fighting, with a number being burned as to deny us any ability to operate in those areas still designated as hazardously cold. The villagers, I ask with a slight edge, most accepted being moved to the city by their liberators. Tullius allows himself a brief moment of sarcasm. The rest were simply left out in the cold. Thankfully, being Nords, they usually survived. But not all. I note icily who gave the order. Tullius huffs to himself, I would love to know that myself, but the Dawnstar Raiders are a largely independent unit, given free rein by their Jarl to ensure our army is unable to muster the logistics to storm the city without catastrophic losses. So Skald is getting gelded. I nod immediately. Got it. A couple of the officers pale, but most look gleeful at the idea. Tullius hums to himself, almost as if actually considering it. Finally, he settles on, many things happen on the battlefield. He ponders aloud, should he be found heavily wounded, I am certain that no one would look too deeply into it. Right, I snort. Our current plan, he indicates the same river neatly cutting the entire theatre in half, is to storm the Icevine River and encircle the city, allowing us to fortify ourselves against attack from the city itself and giving us the perfect opportunity to head off Ulfric's reinforcements. A defeat in detail, I ask with a raised eyebrow. Indeed. Tullius nods, the force guarding the river and city numbers slightly over 10,000, and their reinforcements over 12 as your own agents provided. He gives me a brief look of thanks, before continuing, we are 23,000 strong ourselves, with forces from all of the loyal holds present. I intend to leave the warriors from Markarth and Morthal to fend off any counterattacks from Dawnstar while we focus on bringing down the Stormcloak army and hopefully capture Ulfric. Wouldn't hold my breath for that one, I quip, earning an annoyed scowl from the man. And the plan after that? I ask. No need to overcomplicate it. Tullius nods. Let them start starving briefly, then storm the walls and docks at the same time, and it will fall within days at most. The people are already close to rioting due to your efforts and Skald's inability to resolve the nightmare issue, so we would not have to wait long. Very well. I allow, but should said starvation start getting out of hand, we will be having words. Silencing the indignant cries of a small number of his command staff, Tullius simply nods. Of course, we are here to restore order, not to butcher. That seems to calm the indignant among the officers as they nod proudly. I spend a silent moment looking over the now heavily populated map and ask, when is Ulfric supposed to arrive? Our scouts report a week in the shortest. He tells me, but something tells me that even with their superior training and guides, they still missed a large number of the mountain passages, so he could very well appear tomorrow for all we know. So we must act fast. I surmise, if we wish to be safe, we must ford the river and have everything prepared within. I allow my clairvoyance to work its magic for a while, testing each and every possible time frame and looking for the one that felt the most optimal. 2 days, I declare. Tullius did not need to ask me for the reason behind that specific number and merely allowed himself to curse quietly. His silent, divines damn it, going unheard by all except myself. He quickly gets himself back together. However, I am afraid that such a rapid construction will wither even the Legion, leaving us open to attack. I tilt my head and stare down at the map, searching for a place of interest. It doesn't take me long before I notice one of the larger mountain passes marked with what I guessed was a symbol for a burial ground. What is that place? I ask. Tullius looks at it and then to one of his officers. The questor nods and approaches, That spot marks Myrnid's Rest, Sir Court Mage. He lists off, it is a medium-sized burial ground filled to the brim with Draugr and divines know what other horrors. I hum lightly and nod at the man. He takes it as the silent command to leave it was, and I find myself in whispering distance of the general. I noticed you have the little penal battalion present in camp. I say so quietly, only he could hear me. He nods. I do. Why? It would seem I have found the perfect place for them to redeem themselves. I point at Myrnid's Rest and say nothing more. Tullius frowns, but it doesn't take him long to realize what I was getting at. You wish to have them use the tomb's resources as a delaying tactic? Yes. I nod. Any necromancer of sufficient skill can take over an undead being. Having them fling the walking corpses at our enemies should buy us a day if they do it well. The general's mouth twists in obvious distaste, but it takes him only a moment's hesitation before he nods. Very well, do with them as you will. Just make sure the attack doesn't get connected back to us. I wave his concerns off. As much as they may hate us, even the Stormcloaks will hesitate to accuse us of defiling their tombs. Right, Tullius deadpans. In any case. I speak a bit louder this time, signaling the conversation as over. Do you have reports of enemy Archmagi present within the city itself? There are none. Tullius immediately confirms the presence of the Flameheart twins in the Legion has done well in keeping that particular clan back from joining the fight directly, but I doubt they would pose much of a challenge to you in any case. Most likely not, considering what I know of their mentality. I note offhandedly, where are the twins anyway? In solitude, he answers simply, probably wise. I accept easily and then focus on the real question. In that case, I will have no issues with joining the battle myself. Where do you want me? Your own forces have been spotted setting up camp at the edge of the mountains near the coast 2 days ago. I've already sent the 54th cohort to join them alongside Battle Mage Tiberius. He informs me, I want you to join them and assist us in a pincer maneuver once our main assault begins. Classic hammer and anvil. I hum approvingly, earning a surprised raise of an eyebrow from the aged general, but something in his words confuses me somewhat. The 54th cohort? Anything special about them? They proved their courage many times over in their defense of Helgen's Soul Mountain Passage. Tullius smiles lightly. I do believe you are acquainted with the recently promoted quester in charge of them as well. A vicious grin spreads on my face as I realize who he was talking about. Tullius, my good man, you give the best of gifts. Far away, across half the hold, a certain orc wearing his newly forged legionary steel plate suddenly felt a shiver go down his spine. Chapter 287, Chapter 3, Machinations. General POV. Within a hidden clearing, situated atop a hill to the east of the Icevein River, sat a fortified camp. Its walls either raised by magic or mechanical labor, and its interior filled to near overflow with warriors from 3 different groups. At the camp's center, a small gathering of what looked to be officers and leaders was sitting around a fire and discussing their plans. In one corner sat idly Thane Thorfinn of Winterhold, as Lieutenant Garm of the Winterhold Guard, the actual leader of their force, kept questioning a nearby Dunmer elite about the capabilities of his fellow elves. The Imperial contingent occupied the next corner, their Orsheimer leader glaring holes into the back of his compatriot's head as the young Imperial was currently being fed and pampered by a divine's damned Dremora of all things. And finally, the last group was represented by the stoic figure of Captain Orin of House Dagoth, flanked from one side by a paladin of Auriel and by a cloaked figure and one of his veterans on the other. Their moment of relative peace was crushed without a hint of mercy as the air beside them cracked, a tall form appearing in a flash of magic and kicking up the dust left from the construction. The elves reacted immediately, the entire camp seemingly stopping for a split second before, faster than even the most stuck-up of Imperials could manage, the surroundings of the dust cloud were filled with 220 mer standing in perfect formation, already mid-salute. Raven's POV. My mask hid the satisfied grin on my face as I observed my troops acting in such magnificent concert, my eyes quickly snapping to the gathered leaders of the camp. I offered a quick nod to the guests, but left them for later as I focused on my own people and the extra. Captain, I sense losses, your report. He offers a crisp salute, a simple fist-on-heart gesture, and speaks, we arrived in Winterhold as ordered and gathered our supplies. As we were about to leave, Jarl Asser ordered his own soldiers to join us, and I saw no reason to deny them. He pauses briefly, almost as if waiting for judgment. He is given none. We are allied, so your decision is perfectly acceptable. I turn to Thorfinn and Garm. I am surprised you managed to scrounge up so many. A good 400 if my sight did not suddenly fail me, considering how surrounded Winterhold is. Thorfinn shakes his head, but before he can speak, he is interrupted by Garm's loud snort. You may not be one of us on parchment flame tongue. He chuckles, but there is no true Nord of Winterhold who wouldn't fight at your side when called. A series of loud I see spreads through the Nordic ranks, and I am honored by your friendship. I incline my head at them, a gesture they return. But we can share our greetings later. I decide and turn back to Oren, continue. By your will. He bows. After we left the city, we spent 3 days on a mostly peaceful march, the only annoyances being snowy saber-cats, which were dealt with swiftly and appropriately. Idly, I notice a couple of my marksmen donning new cloaks of white fur. It was on the 4th day that we were presented with an opportunity. He gestures to the cloaked figure beside him, the mer not reacting in the slightest as his eyes were focused fully on mine since I arrived. This kinsman. Oren goes on, offered us information on enemy raiding camps, in return for a meeting with you. He finishes with a slightly weary tone. We can discuss the presence of the good champion later. I wave the whole thing off, the little shit still not reacting. Finish your report, Captain. Suddenly a lot more uncomfortable he does as he is commanded. We followed his information and checked up on it with our own scouts. This led to us destroying 4 entire companies of Dawnstar raiders with minimal losses on our side. After gathering the spoils, we marched for 1 more day and then set this camp up, and were soon joined by the 54th Solitude cohort. He finishes, that was yesterday. I hum lightly, the silence stretching for uncomfortably long and almost making the devoted captain squirm. But I could not expect him to perform on my level of information, and the decisions he made were generally wise, with every intention to serve me as best as he can. So I finally settled on a simple, very good, Captain, you do the house honor with your deeds. The mer straightened up at my praise, but I was done with him for now. I looked at the still-seated Tiberius and snorted as he gave me a challenging look. Still a lazy twat, eh? The Imperial looked up at me. Well, imperiously. What you call lazy, I call enlightened. Uh-huh. I deadpan and turn to the orc. Zarok, I see the promotion stuck. It did, sir. He salutes somewhat awkwardly, the mix of fear and respect he had for me warring within him. The men thank you for saving our asses back at Helgen. It was my genuine pleasure. I grin behind my mask, and going by his slight shiver, he must have felt it as well. Letting out a satisfied hum, I decided it was time to address the big issue here. If that was all, I pause briefly, and once no one speaks up, I continue. Could someone kindly inform me why in the ever-loving fuck is the champion of Boethia sitting in the middle of my camp? The reactions were instantaneous as the entire camp immediately went to high alert, as everyone pointed their weapons at the still-seated hooded elf. Oren looked especially ashamed by his perceived failure to identify him, but as I've said, this went beyond him. As for why even the Dunmer were up in arms about this, as much as they may worship Boethia, even they knew the absolute murder machine one had to be to become her champion. You cry out in alert. A calm, aged voice came from the cloaked figure, yet you stand before me unmoving. Correct, I state simply. It is as I expected then. He scratches his chin. I was sent here to be slain. Getting his meaning immediately, I snort, Boethia is quite the bitch. A light, almost amused scoff leaves him as he gets up. That she is. The cloak falls off, revealing a truly built Dunmer clad in the famous ebony plate mail of Boethia. A long blade of the same metal hung from his hip, paired with a dagger made to punch through armor. So, I begin after a brief silence. What does Miss Murder Deathkill want? I was sent here to challenge and slay you. His answer carries neither hesitation nor hostility, and in return, I will finally have my freedom. Got tired of the constant butchery? I ask, unsurprising. He just shrugs. It is what it is. And what do you offer in return for me giving you the chance? I ask, almost eagerly. He pulls out a fat stack of paper, all of it neatly rolled up in a scroll. A full report on what I managed to get from Stormcloak's camp, their plans included. He immediately gives me an amused look, and I trust you aren't naive enough to think I did not make sure you could just take them. Even if you are the enchanter, you wouldn't get there before the paper was turned to ash. Masterfully done. I clap my gauntleted hands, but you forget one very important fact. I trail off. Your guildsmen wouldn't have access to this. He shakes his head immediately, giving me the feeling of blunt honesty. Their camp is as tight as a Meridian cultist's arse. Unable to contain the snort at the comparison, I cannot help but say, you know what? I think I like you, Terran. His eyes widen. How do you know that name? Come now. I smile lightly. You should have done your homework if you decided to face me. He takes a moment to calm down. Right. So is that it? I ask. You die and I get the reports while Boethia gets to think she has a new plaything. Why does she want to replace you anyway? I grow tired of the constant killing, he declares, and a number of the Dunmer give him looks of genuine astonishment. I wish to create, not destroy. A smith. I guess, a worthy alternative if you ask me. So yes. He ignores me as he pulls his blade free of its sheath. If I must kill you to finally be free, I will do so without hesitation. And what if... I pause ominously. I offer you an alternative. Blasphemy flashes into existence in my hand. Terran's POV. My eyes narrow as I instinctually take a defensive stance, my dagger already firmly in my left hand as I take a step back and find us both surrounded by a wall of shields. An alternative? I grit out, buying time to plan around the suspiciously confident child. He twirls the artifact blade, either completely unaware of the malice he was projecting or simply uncaring. How do you feel about both spiting Boethia and getting an opportunity for gainful employment? Must he be so irritatingly dramatic? I almost snarl as my nerves are tested by the standoff. And what? Exchange one master for another? I ask, slowly circling around him. He had yet to so much as take a step. I already said it. I will have my peace, or I will have my death. Your death which would swiftly lead you to Attribution's share, he informs me in a self-assured drawl. I was indeed aware of the fact the Daedric realm awaited me after death, but at this point I just wanted it all over with. But what if that was not the case? The intensity of Dagoth's eyes almost burned. What if I could free you from the Daedra? He asks, all it would take is your allegiance. I already said, I do not want to continue the killing. I stop him firmly. His words were as tempting as honey, but I knew of his patron and his high standing with the webweaver. He would not cheat me so easily. And who said anything about killing for me? He tilts his head, almost amusedly. I am in need of a master weaponsmith, and that blade was forged by you, no? For a moment I am both stunned and distracted with the pride I felt for my work, but I quickly got myself together. Is this all a game to you? I cannot help but ask, the ease with which he let go of the opportunity to get a warrior of my caliber almost stunning me on the spot. To me, he asks, no. He shakes his head, but it is to the Daedra. And I really like spiting those who see me as a piece on their board. Your offer is good, I admit after a brief silence, but it is also too good to be true. I hear him sigh, a staff which felt even more dangerous than the sword appearing in his hand faster than I could react, and a wave of magicka, far more potent than any I felt in my 200 years of life, exploded off him. And then, as if he was not satisfied, he used the Nord's magic Tayyid. I could not even hear the next words he spoke, and before I could so much as twitch to the side, I found a sword piercing both through the ebony mail and through my side, perfectly missing my vitals. The moment the blade pierced my flesh, I felt all of Boethia's power leaving me, making me feel weaker than I did in years. And as those twin burning flames looked into my very soul, the realization hit me, I never stood a chance, did I? I am afraid. The now far deeper voice of Lord Dagoth rumbled from below that dreadful crown, that I am no longer asking. He pulled out the blade and my consciousness slipped. General POV. 3 Dunmer-looking Daedra looked at the confrontation intently as it was brought to a swift end. The one sitting in the middle scoffing loudly, "Fine, I concede that he cannot be brought to heel." A disappointed exhale could be heard from the one wearing the flower crown as she handed her frustratingly smug, chitin-clad counterpart a brilliantly glowing gem filled to the brim with soul energy. "It is decided then." Boethia spoke to Azura and Mephala. "Once Anu's child has been punished for its tantrum, we will—" She pauses before forcing out, "request the blasphemer's aid." Azura frowned but nodded. Mephala cackled like an absolute madwoman, and both of her counterparts held back groans. She was going to be so insufferable about this. Why, or just meme about join my Discord server. https discord.gg/nsdhgqpbsf. Refreshed. Chapter 288, Chapter 14, Rambling and Recruitment. Raven's POV. As the now former champion of Boethia falls unconscious, I make a show of wiping my gauntleted hands, lazily pulling blasphemy out of the legendary armor without making a sound and depositing it back into my soul space. Someone take him to a tent and let him rest. Do not touch the armor if you can help it. The veteran who was standing at the ready beside Orin immediately got to work, dragging Terran's limp body to a nearby tent. The sound of armor being dragged across the soft ground, failing to disturb the sudden stillness that had befallen the entire camp. Unperturbed by this, I simply unsummoned my crown and took a seat by the crackling fire. I grabbed a stick covered with sizzling bits of meat and took a bite, intentionally letting out a far too sensual moan and nodding to myself. Scorch appeared on my shoulder and I tossed him a bit. He gulped it down in one movement and nodded as well. This is some good shit. This finally seemed to break the awkwardness as the troops slowly relaxed and went about their day, while the officers allowed themselves to slowly sit back by the fire. They were silent for a while longer, but after a while Tiberius was unable to take it anymore and asked in a slightly disturbed tone tinged with awe, "I am sorry, but what in all the gods' names just happened?" The rest seemed just as curious, if a bit more wisely reluctant to ask me. Smiling eerily, I shrugged my shoulders and waved it off, like it was not a big deal. Boethia tried serenading me. I refused. I barely held myself back from laughing aloud when my words finally clicked. Orin looked scared shitless. The paladin nodded in approval. Thorfinn looked at me like I was an idiot. Garm laughed his ass off. Zarok looked just about ready to piss himself. And Tiberius definitely regretted ever asking me anything. But that is enough about my demonic escapades. I cut into their mental breakdowns with a clap of my hands. What have you lot been up to recently? We spent a good 2 hours catching up after that. We were in no hurry, since unless Tullius sent out orders, we would not be doing anything for as long as 2 full days. Tiberius was the first to answer, almost gleefully describing the increasing responsibilities delegated to him by Imperial command, due to his immense flexibility on the field and his ability to save up on manpower due to simply being able to resummon his servants should they fall in battle. Exactly the reason Tullius called him Battle Mage back in the main camp, his promotion was as inevitable as the big head he inevitably got from it. Naturally, all it took for him to suddenly appear as humble as a priest was for me to idly ask him about his combat magic training. Even after all his experiences, he somehow still managed to slack off. You know, the biggest irony is that idiots like this are the ones to usually survive, Scorch points out unhelpfully. Zarok was far less willing to engage in any non-professional conversation with me. Not that he did it out of any disrespect. Dude was simply too scared to speak with any real confidence. His men seemingly shared his thoughts, as a good chunk of them were former Sprawl residents. At least I would not have to worry about them disobeying orders. Garm did not have much to say. The man simply offered me a bottle of mead and a cheer before waddling off to his own people to ensure no one did a funny because of my earlier words. Thorfinn, on the other hand, had changed a fair bit. He was still as short as I remembered. Poor man was seemingly cursed to remain a pocket prince forevermore. but that did not stop him from advancing in other areas. He had apparently befriended Jarl Asur, and the two spent a good chunk of time either sparring together or just being two rambunctious youths when the people weren't looking. The bout of teasing he sentenced himself to when he revealed the fact that the two seduced a pair of twin daughters of the local miller. One drunken night almost made his face burn off in embarrassment. I stopped only when he mentioned something I valued even above annoying people, namely magic. His magical focus turned fully toward alteration, much like the captain of his Hold's Guard, and his attainments in casting enhancement spells placed him squarely at the expert level. He even had a formal declaration from Tolfdir for his ability, which earned him even more respect from the Hold and had him firmly entrenched in the city's ruling nobility, even at his young age. But none of their achievements came even close to my own tales, so they kept pestering me to tell them about the mad shit I've been doing in recent months. I did fold after a while and proceeded to share a carefully edited tale. Just as I finished retelling the dragon slaying and the reveal of the Dragonborn to the captive audience, the soldier that dragged Terran away came up to me and after saluting spoke, He hesitated briefly. "Guest is awake, my lord." I gave the crowd an apologetic look and got up. "We will have to continue this later. Enjoy yourselves today because when the sun rises tomorrow, I want full discipline back in this camp. Dismissed." There was some grumbling at first, but as I continued staring at them, mostly the Nords, they all got the message and dispersed, doing their best to enjoy what was likely to be the last night of relaxation in a while. The scene I arrived upon when I reached the tent made me smirk involuntarily at just how wary my people truly were of Boethia. The whole thing was surrounded by a dozen marksmen with fully loaded repeating crossbows and another dozen halberdiers, all of them staring at it with rapt attention and only relaxing when I arrived. The paladin, Anondor was his name, opened the tent flap for me as I approached. "I have healed the wound, my lord, but the prisoner remains weak even after our strongest potions." "I will deal with that." I raise a hand to forestall any further words. "Leave me." They hesitate for a moment, but soon follow the order, and I step inside, my eyebrow immediately raising of its own volition as I observed the immensely tired-looking Dunmer. Well, he did bring it upon himself and killed who knows how many people, so it wasn't like I cared about his suffering, if I was being totally honest with myself. "I trust your accommodations are acceptable," I ask with false cheer. "Why am I alive?" Terran rasps out. "Did you not hear me earlier?" I tilt my head, a wicked grin spreading on my face as he glared at me. "You may have refused me at first, but I denied you your refusal, and here we are." He half scoffs, half chuckles. "Is my ability to smith ebony so valued that a great lord such as yourself would forego his honor to recruit me?" "Don't flatter yourself," I snort, earning another glare. "You are a mass murderer at the very least, and considering your age, I do not even wish to imagine the depravities you committed during your lifetime." I pause briefly, allowing my words to sink. "No." I shake my head. "The sole reason you are alive, the sole reason I will grant you your wish to find peace." I lean threateningly close to him, my eyes burning so brightly they probably burned his retina slightly. "The only reason your pathetic soul is not currently languishing inside a soul gem." My threatening glare suddenly turns to a happy grin as I point a thumb toward myself, is to spite Boethia, who thought she could play her petty games with me. He turns completely silent as I finish my little rant, staring at me in a whole new light. Finally, he allows himself a mirthless chuckle. "So I will get what I wish, simply because you are one petty child raging against the gods." "Is this fucker still trying to provoke us to kill him?" Scorch asks, genuinely baffled. "Did he smoke some of that good cat sugar before he came to commit suicide by us?" Instead of lashing out like he no doubt expected a supremely powerful youngster to do, I simply grin and nod. "You are completely right." His hopeful look turns sour and then baffled before he allows himself to fall back onto his pillow and starts laughing his ass off for an entire minute. Finally, he stops and looks up with a grin of his own. "I think I can live with that." "Uh-huh." I nod patronizingly and clap my hands as if I'd ever not ensure your loyalty in some way. Before he can even understand my meaning, the room is suddenly filled with yet another person, as Mephala materializes herself in her little puppet. The Daedra looked even more giddy than usual, and I could pretty much guess what happened in Oblivion. She immediately envelops me in a cheerful hug from behind Raven. The cheer in her voice is so infectious, even Terran fails to keep hold of his reaction. You really need to visit the spiral skein at some point. All these delightful things you are doing are making me go wild. I completely fail to so much as twitch as her breathy words reach my ears, staring into the distance with a defeated deadpan. Right. I forcibly stop myself from face-palming and focus back on Terran. So here is the deal, you psychopathic fuckhead. His earlier glare returns with a vengeance. Either I stab you and ram your excuse for a soul into a neat little gem, which I will then use to enchant my personal toilet. Even a person of his caliber pales at the insinuation, or I turn and point to the still horny spider lady. You accept my rules. Namely, you shall not commit violence of any kind save for self-defense or the command of me or my intermediaries. I begin listing, and his face somehow turns even more sour. Nor shall you commit any other crime in the spirit of the laws I present my people with. I snap my fingers. Mephala, do your thing. The moment Terran hears me, his glare turns to an expression of pure fear. You are fucking insane, kid. But he goes completely ignored as Mephala moans, I love it when you are so commanding, before staring straight into the bedridden Dunmer's eyes and offering him the deal. The stare-down lasts for a good 5 minutes, as I practically feel the idiot genuinely debate between the pros and cons of being my designated chamberpot and accepting the actual spirit of his wish. But his decision was as inevitable as his earlier defeat, as he released a sigh of despair and nodded slowly. Capital. I clap my hands. Now let us see that info you had. As the grumbling new member of House Dagoth brings out the heavily cursed scroll, I hear Mephala mutter into my ear. Do be sure to visit, dear, before disappearing. I awoke early the next day with an annoyed frown on my face. I rarely dreamed much, and when I did, it was the usual insanity one might expect of someone as over-imaginative as I. But this time it was different. I remembered nothing of what I dreamed, but I knew it to be something which made me uneasy and uncomfortable. The possibility of Vermina fucking with me already was there, but I doubted she noticed me so quickly. Or was I underestimating the Daedric rumour mill and paying for it already? My confusion only grew when I woke up the next morning, perfectly fine. I wanted to ponder the situation further, but a mere 10 minutes after I awoke, a messenger arrived from the Imperial encampment, carrying Tullius's marching orders now that he had had the time to acquaint himself with the changes in enemy numbers. How Ulfric managed to double his forces so quickly, I was not sure, honestly, but he was gambling a lot for a single victory, and I would be more than happy to show him the error of his ways. 10 minutes later we were, all 1,100 of us men and elves, marching out through the slight fog which had descended upon the future battlefield. The slight rumble of the earth, the only real noise that followed our march. As we approached our designated position, I opened my eyes and waited. And waited. And in the distance, the sound of military ballistae letting loose cracked through the air as multiple explosions hit the eastern riverbank. Without a word, I summoned my glaive and pointed it forward. The battle for Dawnstar had begun. Chapter 289, Chapter 15, Icevine. General POV. To the men of Jarlskald tasked with guarding the only shallow point on the ice vein wide enough for an army, the day began as any other they could remember in the past weeks. Ever since the Imperial Legion broke through the fort that guarded the roads from both Morthal and Whiterun, the invaders had set up camp as close as they could and simply waited there, doing absolutely nothing. The Dawnstar Raiders, all 3,500 of them stationed outside their beloved city, tried harassing their supply lines, as was their usual tactic in warfare, but even their chainmail and large round shields failed to protect them from the constantly shifting tactics of Torrig's loyalists' patrols. Whenever they would gain ground, they would soon find themselves assailed, as if their advance was predicted with magic. Whiterun cavalry would descend upon their hiding spots from seemingly nowhere, or their supposedly surprise assaults would be met with a staunch line of Solitude's new legion. But worst of all were the tales of a single man wearing armored legion robes. More often than not, the men would grow bold, seeing a single man guarding a supply train, only to suddenly be overwhelmed with what they swore were Daedra wearing imperial steel. The one-man army had become the boogeyman of the raiders, and the men trembled at the mere mention of him, some even going so far as to describe him as a vile lich wearing the face of a young lad. After 2 weeks of constant losses, their commander simply decided to fortify the crossing as hard as he could. If their rapid aggression would not work, then they would have to settle with their mighty shield wall and rely on their spear arms to win the day. Indeed, the day started as any other, and nothing changed till noon, for just as the coastal fog started lifting, did the men on guard duty hear the distant twinging of boughs and the distinct sound of wood striking wood. They had an entire 10 seconds to get a hold of their surprise before their side of the ford was struck with ballista bolts and catapult projectiles, which quickly exploded into flames as the pitch within the pots caught fire and stuck to the wooden structure. Screams of pain filled the air as Captain Frokmar Bannertorn scrambled out of his tent while rapidly putting on his helmet. The man immediately started barking orders for the men to take cover and prepare for an assault. They hid behind their walls and dugouts as the bombardment continued for 20 whole minutes. Many fools that dared peek out of cover soon found their faces burned by a random explosion. Or if they were unlucky, they found the pitch stuck to their bodies as they were forced to roll on the ground in pain, further lowering morale. By the time the artillery stopped, a good number of the men of Dawnstar were still half deaf, with their ears ringing due to the constant explosions. But their leaders were not hairless youths. As the moment the assault ceased, the veterans of the Great War started barking orders once more, and the wall was swiftly manned by the disheveled defenders. And just in time as well, as the Imperials seemed awfully confident in their Kyordelic engineers, so much so in fact that the vanguard of Markarth and Solitude infantry advanced just a couple dozen paces behind the falling munitions. Javelins! Frokmar's command rang out, and even rattled his men obeyed without hesitation, hurling hundreds of the throwing spears at the advancing shield wall. Dozens fell, and before they could go for another volley, the attackers returned the favor as they finally marched into range. Well over 1,000 spears and thrown axes sailed over the wall, mangling many atop the walls and burying themselves into the unsuspecting men waiting behind. The exchange continued for a time, bodies piling up on both sides as the shield wall edged ever closer. Soon the attackers were joined by a line of Folkreath archers who started loosing their arrows in such a rhythm that the defenders could no longer return fire quite as easily, just in time for the ladder teams to rush through the sudden openings in the ranks of the infantry. The presence of a Brotherhold's troops fighting for the enemy further struck at the rebels' morale. The men of Dawnstar readied themselves to repel the legionaries scaling the ladders, but it would seem the world itself had it out for them on this day, as even more Imperials rushed through the ranks of the vanguard. Frokmar barely held himself back from cursing out loud as he saw shock troops straight from Castle Dour being led by the legate Ricker, followed by what looked to be over 100 Bretons in full-plate armor wielding greatswords. "Ready yourselves, brothers," Fromar shouted, "for Ulfric and Talos." His men echoed his battle cry, and as the first soldier in Solitude colors scaled the walls, had his head caved in. The battle had begun. They seemed to be holding as men on ladders made for easy targets, but their moment of success was short-lived as the Bretons pointed their hands to the lowest point of the wall, and the ground magically rose into a perfect ramp for their assault, Ricker's men wasting no time in charging over it and falling upon the surprised defenders. This time Frokmar failed to stop himself. Fuck! The melee soon turned even more bloody as the Imperials gained a foothold, and the most elite of the raiders were forced to face both veteran legionaries and the mighty Breton knights. As the men on both sides grew more desperate to gain an advantage, magic started erupting all across the narrow battlefield. The few Dawnstar magi not tied to the Flameheart clan showering the attackers in ice to debilitate them, while the Imperial officers responded with scrolls of fire and lightning. A mere 20 minutes later, nearly 1,000 men lay dead on the wall, with about 6 Imperials per 4 rebels, and the battle line refused to move even slightly. That is until the backline of the raiders suddenly started falling like cut grass, the distant sound of metal crossbows being fired breaking even through the cacophony of the battlefield. Frokmar needed only one quick look at the line of crossbowmen kneeling in front of a line of halberds and legionaries, and under a large triangular banner of black and purple, to know he was well and truly fucked. Raven's POV. It took the poor fuckers a good 30 seconds to scramble up a response, more than enough for my mere 50 marksmen to cut down well over 400 men. Repeating crossbows were usually shit weapons, but add some piercing and strengthening enchantments and they become the medieval heavy machine gun, perfect for attacks like these. As a thick shield formed to face our advance, I stepped in front of the still kneeling crossbowmen and pointed a single finger at them. A couple of them managed to recognize me in time to thoroughly shit themselves before lightning exploded toward their position, killing another 100 in the blink of an eye, leaving naught but their steaming boots. My men needed no other signal, and my leisurely advance was swiftly overtaken by their charge, the gaping hole in the enemy ranks being swiftly taken advantage of by our immense momentum. As soon as another defensive line managed to slow us down, somewhat ice and fire smashed into them as the warriors of Winterhold and Dagoth showed their true might. Unwilling to be left in the dust, or as was more likely unwilling to seem useless to me, Zarok's people fell upon the weakest spots in their ranks, like rabid animals, punching through them and immediately falling onto the backs of those poor idiots still trying to hold back Rika and the knights. A swift shared look with Tiberius had him nodding and rushing after them, his Dremora appearing just in time to stop the Dawnstar backlines from enveloping the 54th. For whatever reason, the rebels seemed almost as scared of him as they were of me. Well now, that wouldn't do. I snapped my fingers and disappeared inside a nearby shadow. The Dawnstar Magi didn't even have time to react as I impaled one with my glaive and pierced the throat of another with the ebony blade. 5 more fell to my constantly switching blades before they even noticed I was there, and their magic was, while at a respectable adept level, too weak to do anything but feed me their magicka as my robes absorbed the violent energies faster than they could overwhelm them. "Burn, Noir, burn," Scorch chirped giddily as he set fire to those unfortunate enough to be assigned as the mage's protection detail. Some managed to strike him and even take off a wing, but the pyromaniac bird had grown in power just as I had, and he simply shrugged it off by burning a new wing into existence. Even with this, the stubborn ranks of Dawnstar seemed to still have the guts to keep resisting. My hand flashed out in a grasping motion as blades of wind descended upon a Stormcloak officer, turning him into what I could charitably describe as spaghetti. Never forgetty. The bird, currently busy gouging the eyes of an old man, chirped into my mind, and I had to suppress a groan while dodging an ice spear. Forcing my mind away from the cursed words I would most definitely not be able to forget, I speared yet another far too young cryomancer. I felt the air to my side shift, my eyes immediately snapping to a Nord who was probably on some shrooms, judging by his bloodshot eyes, swinging a large Danax at my head. Unbothered by this, I merely glared at him, my eyes burning slightly as magicka surged forth and turned him into mush before he could so much as twitch. I could taste their fear as they beheld a man get unmade with a glance, and I allowed myself a grin, unseen but most assuredly felt, and turned to the rest of them, "You may throw down your arms now." And to my utter astonishment, they actually did. "Well," I chuckled, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent battlefield, "that is a surprise. I demand that the rebel leader be executed, Legate." A tall Breton knight wearing the colours of Wayrest shouted as his fellows, including Reynaud, nodded in approval. "And I have already said that I do not have the authority to make that judgment." Rika shot back icily, "Frokmar Banner Torn will be turned over to the rightful High King with the rest of his ilk, so that he may be judged under the laws of Skyrim." The man seemed inconsolable as he pointed at the tied-up kneeling Nord, who was still covered in blood. "He killed Baldric." "And he did so in battle," Rika snapped back. The Breton fumed, his face reddening. "If you do not execute the bastard, I will." "You will what?" My calm voice presses onto their wills as I lay my hand onto his shoulder. "Kakort mage," he stammers, "you have to right this grave injustice." "Do I thought?" I tilt my head. Tell me, Bernard of Wayrest, I pretend to remember his name as I read it. Is it honorable to slay surrendered prisoners back in your beautiful city? He is not a prisoner, he is a brigand. He snaps back, but seeing me looking at him like he is an idiot, he quickly tries to look as small as possible without humiliating himself. And a brigand still gets to have a fair trial when possible. I correct him patiently before turning to the rest of the disgruntled Bretons, sharing a quick nod with Renew. I speak once more. You have fought bravely on this day, but I can see not many of you have experienced war. Some try to stammer at this fact, but I keep going. More of you will die before this is over. I can assure you of that. Their expressions turn grim at that particular proclamation as they give each other doubtful looks. These were all still mostly young men. The true veterans were all sitting to the wayside, patiently watching how this would go and how their charges would grow. But, I draw their attention once more, it is through this crucible of warfare that you shall earn the glory you have come to find. I raise a clutched fist. Nothing worth having is ever easily attained, my honorable allies, and you must realize this, for without sacrifice there can be no victory. I pause, letting the words sink, and then declare, you have shown your mettle today and saved hundreds of your comrades from death. Now it is the time to show your wisdom and honor your fellow's sacrifice as he would have wanted. The group of young men turn silent, sharing a few looks amongst themselves before they all seem to accept my words and bow before me. Forgive us, court mage. Your words have opened our eyes. Bernard speaks solemnly. We will not dishonor our friend's sacrifice by slaying a prisoner. He gives Rika a respectful nod. Apologies, Legate. Rika simply nods and we watch as they leave. You have grown, kid, she says suddenly. I scoff but don't deny her. I suppose I did. Never seen myself as a leader years ago. And yet you could still give most of the Jarls a run for their money, she points out. What a high bar you set, Legate. I drawl sarcastically and we share a chuckle. The pleasant silence stretches on for a while before a cough interrupts our musings, our eyes immediately falling onto the tied-up stormcloak. Pardon me, but I really need to piss. For a moment, Rika looked like she regretted sparing him. I just burst out laughing. Chapter 290, Chapter 16, The Encirclement. Cleaning up the close to 2,500 corpses took us the better part of the day. The losses were heavily in our favor, as the Empire lost only around 500 in the fighting, with the twice as many wounded being treated with my usual uncaring efficiency. The Stormcloaks, on the other hand, died in droves. They may have held an advantage to begin with, but the sudden assault combined with my hammer attack stopped them from retreating in time to preserve their numbers, and what with the usual Nordic stubbornness, their surrender came far later than was reasonable, and only after my own involvement. 1,000 of them managed to break off as they were stationed on the relative periphery of the battle. The moment their commander realized the battle was lost, he did the smart thing and fucked off back to the city. And still, this did leave us with some 500 prisoners, the vast majority of whom were promptly shoved into a column and loaded up onto an imperial galley that broke off from the blockade. The only ones left were the commanders, and they were given the dubious honor of being questioned for any information they could provide. The fact they would get healed after each session of their defiance did diminish its effectiveness somewhat, but repeat it a couple of times, and even the most stubborn among their number swiftly sold out their kinsmen in a manner so complete, I finally understood why Ulfric broke when the Thalmor imprisoned him all those years ago. Tullius arrived with his posse a mere hour after the battle was done and quickly started giving out orders from his new command post, now positioned at the region's most strategically important point, the crossing. He had the engineers construct a proper bridge, wide enough for a good 3 carts to cross side by side. Where once there was only a shallow crossing, and soon thousands of men were moving from one side to the other, carrying supplies and construction equipment, most of it being wood felled directly from the local forests, and before long a trio of legionary forts surrounded the city of Dawnstar. The rebels stuck within the walls did try and sally out a couple of times when the fogs were particularly heavy, but they quickly learned the folly of their ways when what they thought was a simple construction team turned to be a grinning Tiberius. As if the textbook surround was not enough for the mad lad, Tullius decided to do a Caesar and had another defensive fortification placed to our south, exactly in the most likely direction of Ulfric's approach. The whole thing took days to finish, but the harsh training imposed upon the new legionaries back in Solitude and the direction given by the veteran engineers saw the multiple walled camps connected by kilometer-spanning walls fully erect by the time the day of the enemy vanguard came about. A good day later than I had expected them. But that was to come later, as currently at the eve of the second day of the true siege, I found myself sitting on a rocking chair I brought with me as a large and unnaturally detailed map lay on a low table to my side. Tullius was also seated on the other end and was currently busy staring into the distance, his face covered in the near-perpetual frown he always seemed to develop before battle was joined. From time to time, he would move a figurine on the map from one spot to another, leaving it there for a while until I reacted either positively or negatively, completely abusing the vague feelings I got from each proposed strategy to plan out the most detailed and efficient slaughter of our enemies. While that would work in most cases, you face the issue of manpower and a lack of loyalty. I wave his most recent move off. Falkreath may have surrendered, but I fear some of them would still switch sides if given the opportunity. He scowls and pulls the figurine back, damned cowards. He curses, the eastern forests are too large and thick for any of the heavier troops to face the traitors from Riften, and we know Ulfric is not stupid enough to ignore the opportunity. Switch the Morthal troops with a chunk of the Solitude ones, I decided after a brief bout of thinking. They are used to lighter warfare, and even if the woods aren't their preferred swamps, they will still be able to ambush multiple groups before they are forced into open battle, at which point we can just have them retreat into another ambush point, and so on and so on. That would still leave us overly reliant on our enemy's mistakes, Tullius points out immediately. I shrug, send Tiberius with them, and the Winterhold contingent as well. Their magic will even the odds greatly, and I can cover the rest of the battlefield with ease. The fact I do not consider the statement to be pure arrogance worries me. He grouses with a cynical smirk on his face. Very well, I will pass the command to young Gracchus. It will give me the perfect opportunity to promote him as well. Got to love nepotism, I exclaim happily. The general huffs but doesn't correct me, so long as they are skilled. For all his usual idiocy, I can't say that he lacks skill. I agree and flick a new cigar into my hand. His obsession with conjuration aside, he does have a knack for command. Tullius hums non-committedly and moves yet another figurine, this time denoting the mounted force of the Knights of High Rock. Leaving them well behind our lines as a rapid response unit was the obvious choice, so I made no comment and let the decision remain. These potential revolts you have gained information on, Tullius begins leadingly. Are you certain you will be able to deal with them before they do much damage? I outright chuckle at this. Oh, I wouldn't worry about them overmuch. General POV. Within one of the larger noble halls of Morthal sat the pudgy leader of the local discontents. The supposed leader of the Stormcloaks in the hold was breathing heavily as sweat poured down his brow, his fellows looking up at him with trepidation. I am afraid that the tea time has come, my friends. He stammered as his eyes passed the 10 pairs of crimson embers looking at him from the shadows. To disband. He sighed with finality. His now former comrades quickly split into 2 camps, the ones who actually agreed with the decision and the truly stubborn who could not see the way in which the wind was blowing, those who would no doubt find themselves in numerous accidents should they persist. Only when he managed to calm them all down and explain the situation did they all leave the hall, finally prompting the group of assassins to lower their crossbows and disappear, just in time for his chair to be covered in urine. Raven's POV. Indeed, I would not worry at all. I keep chuckling mysteriously. And what of Riften? He prompts further, now that a good part of the army has departed, when do you plan on overtaking the hold while we fight? Plan on. I tilt my head and can see the headache already forming in the poor man. My good man, the city should have fallen already. This just earned me one very long blank look. General POV 2 days prior. Maven Blackbriar, the dreaded shadow Jarl of Riften, observed her unnaturally quiet city, a massive chunk of the poor being effectively conscripted into the Stormcloak army for the promise of some piddling income Or yet worse, the promise of glory. How they planned to eat that glory she knew not, but she was not about to weep for the stupid. No, her lot was to profit from the idiocy of others, and that would continue for as long as she lived. She did not so much as twitch as Maul barged into her study. Her scathing look was more than enough to have the man shivering under the threat of punishment should his sudden entrance be without reason. A message, her enforcer gulped, from Flame Tongue. Her hand twitched in painful remembrance, but she needed no prompting to relearn that particular lesson and simply asked, "Is it time?" Maul nodded. "Aye." "Very well." She sighed and got up. "Go and rile up the mercenaries and Argonians. I want the whole city under occupation by the time I end Layla." "Yes, ma'am." He saluted and was gone. With a grunt of annoyance, Maven Blackbriar started sliding a veritable slew of enchanted items onto her person, anything from protective amulets to ever-poisonous daggers. She may have hated the fact she would have to be even partly accountable to the people she profited from for all these years, but if she was already being forced into taking command, she would do it right, even if it did cost her her old friend's life by her own hand. The rest of her preparations did not take long after that. Her children were promptly informed to gather up their own warriors, and before the sun had set, they had already stormed the unsuspecting keep, the pitiful Jarl Lawbringer slain before she could so much as react to the betrayal. The Stormcloak leader left behind due to a long-term injury falling not long after that. By the time the sun rose, the city of Riften was in Maven's hands, and thus the Empire's. Even as she observed the falsely adoring populace praising her for their liberation, the old woman could only feel bitter at everything that happened. Raven's POV back to the present. It took him a good minute to gather his wits to a sufficient degree, but the good general was made of stern stuff and gathered himself at an impressive speed. "And the Whiterun supply route?" he asked. "I have my own forces guarding the caravans, but garrisoning the border would just invite an attack that they would be unable to hold with their low numbers." "I did send someone to oversee that particular avenue," I confirm immediately, though whether Ulfric chose to send someone to harass Balgruuf or not, I find myself unsure. Stormcloak officers POV, Valtheim Towers. We grew increasingly cautious as we approached the accursed towers marking the border between Whiterun and Windhelm. My 500-strong cavalry force was sent by the true High King on a mighty task, for we were indeed sent forth to raid our wicked enemies' supply lines in the name of mighty Talos. No elf lovers deserved the food anyway. As we got closer and closer, all of us could see a glint of silver shining atop the tower affixed near the road, and soon a tall elven figure so pale it was whiter than snow revealed itself to us. "You shall not pass," the figure proclaimed with a voice both melodious and powerful. "And who are you to stop us, elf?" I immediately asked, a fair bit of mockery in my tone. "I am Alor, apprentice to Lord Dagoth," he said with immense pride, "and if you do not turn back, you will feel the wrath of the Falmer reborn. You shall not pass." The men started to laugh at his sheer audacity, but something in the back of my head told me this was not going to go well. Still, I would not permit anyone to call me a coward, so I drew my blade and pointed it at the elf. "Come down here if you are so bold. Let us see if your courage remains when you stand before good strong Nords." The elf dared to laugh at my challenge. "So you will not leave?" he asked, almost in anticipation. "What are we even waiting for?" My second in command almost snarled, "He is but one man." "Excellent." The elf grinned. "Witness, then, the power of House Dagoth." He spread his arms grandly, and the very earth around us seemed to shudder. And then we found ourselves surrounded by hundreds of vile machines, all of them armed with crossbows and ballistae. I did not even have the time to scream as my head was blown off my shoulders. Raven's POV. "Nah, they should be fine." I wave the whole thing off and refocus on the map. "Satisfied with your plan, General?" "More than usual." He grunts, almost appreciatively. "Best that we get some rest now. If your sight is true, then tomorrow will mark the start of the deciding battle of this war. Just call it a petty rebellion if you want. You will find no disagreement from me." Earning myself an amused humph from the older man, I was left alone to ponder the coming conflict as sleep evaded me throughout the whole night. As the sun rose, I was once more joined by Tullius, even though this time he was followed by a good chunk of his command staff. He offered me a light salute in greeting and gazed into the distance. "They are here." And they were indeed, for the distant horizon was now covered in the many banners of blue and white, the Bear of Windhelm the most prominent of all. Well then, I jump up from my seat and take a better look at the approaching army. It would seem that our friends did indeed manage to do some damage after all. How incredibly generous of them. I note idly, a couple hundred of their warriors bore barely healed wounds, and their weapons and armor were marked with battle damage. Yes, Tullius takes a slow breath. I did get a report of them returning yesterday, greatly reduced in number is what I hear. I shrug. It was their lot, and the idiots stayed for way too long, but that did give us the time to offer our troops a break, so I'd say it was worth it. I have no doubts of that. Tullius nods and waves for me to follow. Come, we have a war to win.